today, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Please feel free to mute yourself upon entering, and then as always, if you wish, please include your name and your affiliation in the chat box so we can do proper note taking. Thank you for joining us for our October 8th GSPAC meeting. Again, we have one coming up on October 22nd as well. So 2 days of fun here for our October GSPAC discussions. Again, Marina Delajanis, Lake County Water Resources Deputy Director and lead of the GSPAC. I'm going to go ahead and start off with roll call. When I call your names, can you please say here? All right, Brenna Sullivan.
Here. Good morning, Marina.
Good morning, Brenna. Pat Scully.
Here.
Hi, Pat. Good morning. David Wise.
Here.
Hi, David. Kyle Reams. Not present. Okay. Sarah Ryan.
I am here.
Hi, Sarah. Good morning.
Morning.
Scott Hornig.
I'm here.
Hi, Scott.
Hi.
Val Nixon. All right. And then Sky Hoyt.
Here.
Awesome. Hi, Sky. And Marina Delajanis, present. Let me go ahead and pull up the agenda. All right. So we are going to move forward into the review and approval of September 24th, 2021 minutes. Are there any comments, edits, questions on the minutes that were posed?
And Marina, if I can interject, that those minutes reside on the Lake County Water Resources website, should anybody need to take a gander at them.
I'll throw that in the chat as well.
Perfect. Thank you,
Thanks,
Will.
William.
Marina, I did have a comment on something I thought probably should be added to the minutes, and I just didn't see it, although I know it's not supposed to be a transcript. And it had to do with my question about the dry wells. I had also asked if about the dry wells that have been reported for the Big Valley Basin, and there was a map that got put up from, I think, probably the state, and showing dry well reports. And of course, we had been discussing the ones that hadn't been reported, but also ones that had been reported. And so I just thought that it was important to make a note that, you know, it appeared that there were wells, you know, that there was a question about the dry wells in the Big Valley Basin, and also appeared from the map that there were some dry wells in the Big Valley Basin.
Gotcha. Thank you for that, Sarah.
Thanks.
Are there any other comments or questions for the September GSPAC minutes?
Yes, I have a couple points.
Okay, go ahead, Sky.
Okay, so on page 5, the second paragraph from the bottom, I'm pretty sure it's just a typo, but it says Windram, and that's Peter. Also added that frost protection is not done in the valley because it's lower and colder there. And I think what he said was the opposite, that it is done in the valley because it's lower and colder there. And probably important for non-farming people to understand, this is a little bit counterintuitive, because people see a winter storm and they see snow at high elevations. So they presume the lower elevations, or, you know, the higher elevations are colder. But in terms of springtime frost protection, the opposite is true. The lower elevations are colder and the upland elevations are warmer. So Peter, is that correct, that that's miswritten?
Peter, I don't know if you're speaking, but you are on mute if you are.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so we need to change, you know, delete that one word, however you do that. So I think you want to say frost protection is done in the valley.
Oh yeah. Sky, point out one more time. I missed that. So
Page 5, the second paragraph from the bottom.
let's see. Could we show that on the screen? I'm looking at it. Let's see.
I can share it, Marina, if you'd like.
Okay, I believe, is it Ibrahim who is sharing the screen right now?
Yeah, please share, William.
Can you, everybody see it?
Yeah, I see it. I'm trying to find that statement there.
Farther down. There we go, second paragraph, no. So that'd be the fourth paragraph from the bottom on the screen, bottom of my printed copy.
I did this training once before and I didn't have a mic.
I wonder if we're looking at different documents. I'm not, at least,
Is it page
It's
5?
It's not page 5, but
Are you sure which page it is, Sky?
PowerPoint.
Oh.
Just to
further down.
cover some basics, then we'll get into like the.
William, it's on page 6. It's at the top of page 6.
Sorry.
okay.
Yeah. There you go. It's that very first one.
Yeah, there you go.
So take out the word not.
Cool.
Oh, that's correct. Do take out the word not. Certainly, thank you, Sky, for seeing that.
You're welcome. So I have another point that's maybe a longer discussion, and that's on page 3. And on my printed edition, let's see, that this would be the end of the third paragraph under 4.2. And it starts at the very end. Via the chat, Ryan commented, quote, considering that other classifications have been filled with the same user groups, environment ag, domestic well user ag, I wanted to make sure DAC is DAC. And then 2 paragraphs down from that, Ryan commented, exactly, we are skewing the committee, and I think this is maybe just a slight change, if it's all agricultural interests. And I think as if it's all I don't know exactly what the right grammar would be there, but no offense, everyone. So, so I didn't see this because it was in the chat and I was only on the phone. I didn't see this comment at the time it happened. So if I did, if it was a verbal comment, I think I would have spoke about it then, but I'd like to speak about it now. So I think to take me and to just loosely, or maybe not loosely, describe me as ag is short-sighted and not complete. And it is true, I'm pro-ag land preservation, I am pro-farm worker, and I am pro-farmer. But I'm not currently involved in agricultural business. I'm deriving no direct income from farming at this time. And my opinions about this are based, it's true, largely in part of my experience farming in Big Valley, but it's also from my experience of being in the community there and being with all the people, farmers and farm workers, and the quality of life that brings. And also from my experience, more than 20 years in the Kelseyville Farmers Market, interacting with residents and consumers, many of whom lived in the basin. So if there's an attempt here to kind of take ag and act like there's ag owners and there's a community, and somehow those things are in opposition, I clearly do not believe that that's true. And I think that's really an important point to get here. And the most simple thing that people usually say is look at the number of jobs. I mean, and personally, I think, the jobs that are given to the people who live in the basin are super important. And those mainly do come from big ag now. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but those jobs are really important. And beyond that, the residents of the area who live in Big Valley, in the basin, they probably live there because they like the ambiance of agriculture in Big Valley. So I don't, I get this feeling that there's this ag versus the people, and I don't agree with that. I mean, there's aspects of it that might be true, but I don't basically believe in that as a concept. So that I just think that's really an important discussion around that. And I think it might be good if we had a little roll call and see what people think about that.
Sarah, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I would just like to address what Sky just said. The fact of the matter is that the environmental seat is a farmer. The domestic well owner is a farmer. And so those two seats, which are really important, and it's, no disrespect to either of you because you're very good at what you do, but I don't feel, and we've had this conversation, the makeup of committees over the years in Lake County has been very contentious sometimes and very, strategic. So I believe that that is the case with this one. I know that Scotts Valley Rancheria wanted to have a seat on here in some way. That did not happen. We wanted to have an environmental group be in the environmental seat, and that was, the group decided against, wanted to have certain criteria for that. So, I don't feel that it's balanced in the way of having, people who are impacted by the groundwater levels in terms of being non-agricultural interests. I just don't think we have many of those folks on here, and we have more agricultural interests than those. So I don't believe it's balanced. But, there wasn't a lot of time, not all the seats are filled, and I would definitely characterize anybody who has been engaged in farming and, needing to, and believing in all of the concepts that you need to do, to meet in order to be successful, that you're going to have that agricultural point of view. And so, sorry, I mean, it's my opinion. I've been working around here for 20 years on environmental issues, and that's just how I've seen it. So sorry if it offended anybody. Like I said, no offense. Just, I've had the same comment made to us on other committees. Oh, if you have more than one tribe on here, you're going to skew it. The Clear Lake Advisory Committee, people said that if you have more than one tribe, it's going to skew toward the tribes. And, we all say that, or many of us say that, in the strategic makeup of committees, but I just pointed it out. So, sorry.
And for the sake of time, I know, if this needs to be a future discussion item, I don't think we'll be calling for a roll call about it necessarily. I think the clarification has been made. I would like to ask Marina as lead to go ahead and move forward with the approval of the minutes. We have a very full and packed agenda. Marina, with the following, for people to make a motion with the following changes, that the map of Big Valley Basin would be added. That was popped up on the screen when we were talking about dry wells, per Sarah's recommendation, that the frost protection drop the word not to be correct as a clarification. And then also Sky's clarification about his role and his position on GSPAC and who he serves. And then Sarah's clarification of what she meant by her comments. So those would be included as part of those meeting minutes.
Yes, thank you, Christy. So can I please get a motion to approve the minutes with the outlined edits and additions to the minutes that were just posed by Christy Clark? Sarah, I see a thumbs up. Is that a motion? Awesome. Okay, Sarah Ryan with the motion. Can I please get a second?
This is Brenna. I'll second it.
Thank you, Brenna. I appreciate that. All right, so moving forward, I'm just going to do a very quick update. I do know that there is a slide. If we don't mind going to that slide for the current the dry well reporting. Thank you so much. So here is a current map of our of the wells. This is again that same My Dry Well tracking from DWR. So here's the current update. You can see in total we have 29 wells. We have roughly 5 in the Big Valley area. I want to just hit this very short and sweet. If anyone has any questions, please contact me directly, marina.deligianis, DELIGIANNIS @lakecountyca.gov, or give us a call, 707-263-2344. We still have the work group, the Lake County Drought Task Force. If you want to get involved in those conversations, I believe we have a discussion next week. Let me know. This is that is the group that has these conversations. And then we just finished actually the biannual well runs. William Fox and Jordan Beaton just completed those last week. So we'll have a better idea of current groundwater conditions. So any questions right now on that very quick update?
Yeah, I have a comment.
Yes, go ahead, Sky.
So I corresponded with Supervisor Sabatier about that drought work group, and my understanding is it is not open to the public at this time. It's only county staff.
That is incorrect. So it's not a board appointed committee. That is a work group that was developed by Civic Spark AmeriCorps Fellows. Last year, it was helped develop by DWR. And right now it's just in, I guess it's a floater group. There is no set person in charge of it. There's no set sort of mission statement or goals. No one has taken that work group on. It's just a group of interested stakeholders. I think there's a Google document that has a listserv that, again, was developed by those Civic Spark Fellows that no one has taken over. So we're still trying to figure out how we want this work group to be. If the board wants to make it a board appointed, then that would be up to them. But right now it's just a standing work group. So it's non-board appointed. And if you want to be participating in that, I can send you those invites. But again,
Marina, can I make a quick point of clarification for Sky? Because I think you
Yes.
guys are talking about two different groups. So that's the group you're talking about. Sky, there's also a group through the EOC, county EOC, and
Yes.
that's the department heads, not open to the public. But there is a separate drought task force that Marina was talking about that very much is.
Thank you, Brenna.
Okay, so the one is the drought work group that was formed at Tuesday's BOS. And it's a committee of the BOS. So we got these names that are very confusing. So that's
Yes.
going to be a lot of clarification. But I've had an email conversation with Bruno about it, and it's really clear. So I mean, this is going to be a difficult thing to keep straight. The EOC now, and what is EOC?
So that is developed by, again, as Brenna Sullivan said, that is from department heads. So I believe there's Sheriff Martin on there, Water Resources, Public Works. Brenna, I believe you're in that discussion. No.
No, it's that ag department.
Okay, Ag Department.
Only county entities. Yeah.
Yes. And then the new one that you're referring to, Scott, yes, it's the Sustainable Drought Committee, which is an interesting name. And that was developed by this most recent board. I don't know the set makeup of that yet, but they did pass that to officially form that group. The group that I'm referring to is just a work group. I know Brenna has been involved in those conversations. Sarah Ryan has, other folks on this call as well. I have as well. And that one is just a standing non-board appointed. If you want to be invited to that, I'm more than happy to send you that information, but that's the one that I'm referring to, Sky.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And please do send me the information. And then if we could just talk a little more about dry wells. I'm thinking that the details of this dry well situation is super important. People may have heard me suggest that the current conditions may well be a benchmark for the so-called, MTs? I call them the alarm and action levels for this plan. And I don't see why we wouldn't be like just laser focused on the dry wells that are being reported now, exactly what kind of wells they are, what depth they're at. I mean, because this would be a really important thing to get an idea of how severe is the groundwater situation we're in right now. In my sense, its use as a benchmark makes a lot of sense. So I just don't see why we're not seeing this in feet and looking at, what they were before and exactly what the monthly monitoring is showing. It seems like we should be getting a lot more information on water well depths in the basin right now.
Marina,
I'm feeling I'm in the dark on this.
Marina, before you answer that, Bethany has been very patient with her hand up, her virtual hand up there. So Bethany, did you have a question or a comment?
Well, yeah, I just wanted to, so this is reporting that people are doing or not doing. And in terms of dry wells, I know that there have been some releases from Highland Springs Dam based on complaints from downstream. And so what we've been told is that, when people's wells go dry that are adjacent to, I guess, Adobe Creek, they call up Highland Springs and say, hey, can you release some water? And so I'm just wondering how y'all are accounting for that. Are y'all in conversation about how many people and what the issues are with that?
Yeah, so with Highland Springs, Bethany, that is just a courtesy effort that the county has done in the past. The current water that is being released from the dam right now is due to a malfunction with the gate that we are in the process of trying to fix. So the release is because of a malfunction of that dam gate that is, again, we're having issues with. So the releases now are a result of that. So in the past, the dam has been released courtesy notice from those downstream residents.
Oh, okay. Because Yulia said that you're releasing it on purpose in our conversations. But anyway, maybe it just won't, the gate won't close or something. But I'm just making sure that, you know, I don't know if those are being reported in this, but if they're not, then, you know, they should be taken into account is all.
Yeah, and for the My Dry Well reporting, those are from the folks that have taken the initiative or who have provided information to self-report or send information to whether it be OES or Water Resources to report. I have not received any calls as of late since our last discussion of wells going dry. So again, this is a state portal that folks go in and submit them themselves. So if there are other wells going dry, we don't know until we get reported upon those wells. But I haven't, Water Resources, we haven't received anything since our last discussion. But yes, there's probably more wells out there that we don't know, that we're not aware of.
Thank you for that update, Marina.
So anything else regarding that? Again, I encourage people, if you have any questions, if you want something else that you would like me to report on next time, please let me know. Send that to us so we can include that on the agenda and we have ample time for that discussion. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Eddie for the update on the AEM survey.
Great, and good morning, everyone. And William, feel free to chime in here. Ibrahim, if you could go to the next slide, please. All right, so this is just a real quick update. So again, we were hoping that the AEM survey specific to Big Valley was going to be flown in October. It sounds like now from some initial conversations with DWR, that's going to happen in November. And then also as part of that flight, they're also looking to actually through additional resources fly the Scotts Valley portion as well. So I've included a map of the proposed flight lines in Scotts Valley. So again, just a general update. Nothing's going to happen in October. It's probably going to happen more likely in November. And I think some of the schedule issues have been related to the fires. I don't know, William, if there's anything else you want to kind of chime in on that topic, just to kind of keep things moving forward. But
yeah, the only other thing I wanted to add was thanks to Corolla at Robinson, they're also planning to fly over the Upper Lake Basin too. So we're gonna try to get 3 basins done through AEM. So very exciting.
So I don't know if there's any questions.
I've got a question on
Sure.
that.
Yeah.
Will that give some kind of information as to whether these 2 basins are tied together? And if we find they're not, are we going to get rid of the Scotts Valley Basin as a link to our basin?
Yeah, so it will help to sort of understand sort of the bathtub below, you know, Scotts Valley and Big Valley. And if, you know, as part of that analysis, it looks like there is, you know, a more pronounced geologic barrier, or it's not hydraulically connected, then we can just, what we'll probably end up doing is we don't change the model domain. We would just include that barrier in the model itself. So it would still be it would be a model, but the Scotts Valley would not show, well, depending on the geology, would or would not show a hydraulic connection between the two. So it'll be good to refine it and, you know, refine the geology, the hydrogeology, and then, you know, probably at the 5-year update, we'd modify the model. Does that address your question, Pat?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Bethany, did you have a question, comment?
I think that answered my question in terms of when will this information be brought into the model. It sounds like 5 years from now.
Yeah, the processing for the SkyTem data is going to take, I forget what they said, William, but it's probably going to be what, 8 to 12 months?
Yeah, they said not till 2022. So don't expect the data to be processed until probably mid 2022.
But it's exciting to have that refined information and see how it fits into sort of our current understanding. So the next topic, it really, again, is just a summary. This was some water quality testing that was done. And thanks to DWR, they had reached out to us, I think it was in early August, late July, actually. So in August, DWR came out. They sampled 6 wells. Those wells were selected, you know, primarily because we knew we had access agreements in place. William had some good relationships with those well owners. We kind of want to capitalize on these grants of the funding mechanism. And so we got the results, I think, in September. I mentioned this at the last GSPAC. The map insert on the left shows you the locations of those wells. We'll talk a little bit later on some of the initial water quality data specific to the SMCs, but then the table on the right lists all the parameters that were analyzed as part of that field effort. So, generally it was sort of general water quality parameters. And if you go to the next slide, we'll kind of dive into some of the details. You can see that the names of the well IDs are listed there under the station name. And then across the row lists all the water quality parameters that were sampled for or analyzed for. You can see the items that are outlined in red are water quality parameters that exceed some MCL. So in this case, specific conductance, there's not really a drinking water standard. So, but there's sort of a secondary MCL, actually for agricultural limits. So those specific conductance is just for agricultural limits. So you can see some of those are exceeding the 700 microsiemens per centimeters on the specific conductance. All the other general mineral parameters sort of fall within sort of the window of expected water quality in a basin like that or like this. So if you go to the next slide, we can talk about these in a second. This sort of is kind of related because we're proposing to utilize total dissolved solids as a proxy for the overall water quality health. So if you look at the 6 wells that were sampled and you focus in on TDS, you'll see 2 of those wells had I'd say somewhat high water quality or TDS values or concentrations. Not so concerned about the 480, but the 1500 was kind of a bit of a surprise for us. We're kind of diving into the details on that. So remember, these wells, a lot of these were agricultural wells. And so we're not sure, maybe this well, perhaps there's some construction challenges with this well. Maybe we didn't flush enough fluids out of the well. So the water quality parameter we collected maybe is not representative because it does seem to kind of fall out from the other well locations. And again, I have a map here. I'll show you the exact location of this well. So, but everything else sort of seems to sort of fall in line with what we've seen historically on the TDS side. So I just wanted to kind of share that with you. If you go to the next slide. So again, a lot of parameters on this slide. You can kind of see the items, the parameters that are outlined in red are above some kind of drinking water, drinking water standard. So in this case, iron and manganese are over the MCL. So there's, I don't know how sort of familiar folks are with sort of how the regional board sets up drinking water standards. So there's primary constituents, which are essentially enforceable. And so any of the primary constituents that we sample for are not above the primary MCL, but the secondary MCL. So these are non-enforceable concentrations, and they're more sort of aesthetic. So in this case, taste, odor is generally what flags it. But again, it's not enforceable. You're not required to clean them up. And so you can see that iron and manganese in 4 of the 6 wells were elevated. So as an example for iron, the secondary MCL for iron is 300 milligrams per liter. And you can see our ranges that exceeded that, and in some cases were, an order of magnitude more. Again, that's not a function of how the basin is managed. It's just sort of a function of the geologic setting. So that's sort of, what the iron is coming out of the formation material. And then again, similar with manganese, you can see manganese has a secondary MCL of 50 milligrams per liter. And in this case, there's the 1 order or 2 orders of magnitude that are elevated above the secondary MCL. And again, this is not a contaminant, an anthropogenic contaminant. It's more of a, just a sort of based on the natural conditions of the aquifer system. And then arsenic, there was a question popped up. Arsenic was below the MCL. Yes. So the MCL for arsenic is 10 micrograms per liter. I think the highest concentration we saw or that was detected was 7.8 in one of the wells. So again, it kind of aligns with what we've been sort of, I think, talking about in our geologic settings and some of our initial GSP sections. Generally water quality is I would say it's extremely good sort of in the Big Valley Basin. I think if you go to the next slide, I know I'm going to go through these really quickly, but we can share some of additional details if we have time today, or we can follow up in another meeting. This is sort of a map that shows you the, in this case, it's just the TDS concentrations for the 6 well locations. You can see one of our proposed RMS wells, we were able to sample, it's 480 milligrams per liter. And then if you go to the east, the well that's got the higher TDS concentration, the 1500, we need to kind of dive into that a little bit deeper, just to kind of see what's going on, because it's not really fitting with sort of any of the other trends that we're seeing from this round of sampling and some, historical information we have. So it could be a well construction challenge. It could be telling us something, but again, we haven't had a lot of time to kind of dive into those details yet. So I think if you go to the next slide, if you want to back up one, go back to slide 11. Maybe if we have time, Christy, do we want to open it up for a couple of quick questions? I know there's been some in the chat that I've tried to address as I've been moving forward on this.
Yeah, we're running about 15-20 minutes over time already.
Great.
So so if we could just kind of boogie through it, although I don't right at the moment see anybody from the public who's joined us. So maybe the public comment period, we can kind of slide around a little bit too. So
okay, great.
If there's any burning questions.
All right. So then if you go to the next slide, I think this is something we kind of squeezed in. This is, I call it agenda item 3.4. This is the technical support services. So again, just so folks are familiar, this effort, the facilitation support services, we're capitalizing on that. The technical support services really can be utilized to help collect additional information. So what could it support? It can support the installation of new monitoring wells, groundwater level monitoring training. Fortunately, we're in good hands. William knows how to do that, so we don't need to jump into that. And then also some borehole video logging. So if we know there's wells in the area, we don't really understand the construction information, screen intervals, DWR can kind of come out and run some videos down some of these wells. I think really what we're looking at is trying to capitalize or get the best bang for our buck. And so what we're doing is we're going to sort of utilize the TSS support services to install a multi-completion monitoring well. And so we submitted an initial application over the summer that was approved. Now we're working on the second application, and there's a little more details that need to go into that application. And so ideally, what we're going to try to get is a new nested monitoring well. So we'd have a shallow zone, an intermediate zone, a deep zone. Perhaps we can try to site it in an area where we're tapping into these various aquifer systems. So again, we're having some conversations internally about trying to select a couple of locations. And then obviously, once we kind of narrow that down to maybe 3 to 5 locations, we would obviously share it with this group and get your opinion. I think if you go to the next slide, Ibrahim, this kind of gives you sort of an overview on kind of what we've done in other basins. So really, it's going to be one multi-completion monitoring well, ideally 3 or 4 zones. We would utilize the current hydroconceptual model and some of the geologic cross sections we've developed to try to find out areas where we have data gaps. From what we've seen previously working on other GSPs, DWR would really like it to be a parcel that's owned by the county. It just makes it easier sort of with some of the agreements that need to be put into place. I have worked on some projects up north where they were able to come to some agreement with a private property owner. So in some cases, if we've got a big data gap in an area that's owned by a private entity, it would be nice to get onto that site, but there's some hoops you kind of have to jump through. So again, we'll kind of make this happen. We'll get some locations sort of proposed. If you all have ideas, please share them with us. And then once we get 3 to 5 locations on a map, we'll have a further conversation to dial that in. I don't anticipate this happening, probably this being going out and actually doing the well drilling till probably mid next year. There's some environmental work that has to kind of happen behind the scenes, but it's really exciting. And this is a $200,000 to $500,000 gift essentially for the county to get this installation installed. So we want to capitalize on that. So I think with that, Ibrahim, if you go to the next slide, I'm kind of done with my piece. Again, Christy, you're kind of keeping track on time. If folks have questions or if we have the time, great. If not, we can keep plugging ahead.
I would ask if anybody needs a really, urgent clarifying question. Otherwise, maybe to hold it until we talk about even like the water quality part of the SMC or something, just so that we can move through the updates and get to those SMCs.
Hopefully, yeah, sure. Hopefully everybody's excited about it as I am. So yeah, somebody give me a thumbs up. Come on, Sarah, you can give me a thumbs up. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to Megan with our updates of where we're at with some of our sections.
All right. Hi, everyone. So I just want to provide a super brief but thorough and complete update of where things stand. So just as a reminder and something we have to tell everyone every meeting, that we have a procedure in place that follows the Brown Act compliance. So for the GSPAC, we send you the draft document and a comment log individually. You provide that back to us individually without talking to anyone else. We take in your comments, put them into a master log, address them, provide that comment log back to the entire GSPAC so you can see everyone's comments and how we responded to that, as well as the updated draft. And then that draft is what gets posted to the website. So then for public review, and you have an opportunity to also respond to that draft as well. So Christy, I think I have a next slide. Okay, so here's a fun little calendar of where things stand and what's going on. There's a lot here. So we're already at October 8th. We're having this GSPAC meeting. Next Friday, there's a whole host of things going on. So the comments are due. It's not just GSPAC, but the public. That's a little minor edit to that first piece there on the 15th. Suggestions and input on the communication and engagement plan are due to Maritza and Christy. Then also Ibrahim sent out, I believe on a Sunday, he was working over the weekend, section 4, the sustainable management criteria draft. And those comments are due to me on the 15th as well. And then sections 1 through 2.2.3, so that's everything from the introduction to, the basin setting and the groundwater conditions, GDEs, all of that is currently available for public review up until the 15th, and you would email that, the Lake County email address there. On the 15th, we'll, as soon as all of those comment periods end, we will also be giving you new material to review, and that will be section 5, the projects and management actions. So a lot due on the, coming up on the 15th. Have this calendar. I try to send it in every email so you just know how to keep track of things. If you need the document again or have any questions, feel free to email me. Then on the 22nd, we have our next GSPAC meeting. And of course, on the 31st is Halloween, one of my favorite holidays. So that is the section update. And then just to quickly, I think I already got through item 4.3, which is the schedule for the communication and engagement plan on the agenda. The 4.4, the representative monitoring network. I believe you all have already given feedback on that. We only received a few comments. We're working on addressing those comments. We'll send out the master comment log, the edited document, and then that will be put on the public website and for public review once we're done with that. And then the updates on the project management actions. We received comments from several of you. We're working through those now. I might have emailed you a couple of questions about, just clarification. And so we're working on that, and that's coming up on the 15th. Okay, I talked really fast, trying to go quickly. If you have any comments or questions, you can put them in the chat and I'll answer them. Or alternatively, you can just email me outside of this meeting and I will respond back. All right, phew, okay.
Megan, would you mind putting your email address again, just in case anybody should need it in the chat? Thank you.
Okay.
All right, everybody take a deep breath, stretch a little, and we'll move on to the status of the model.
Christy, time check. How we doing?
We're way behind, so anything that we can gain would be great.
All right, great. Yeah, so Ibrahim, if you go to the next slide. Really, this is just a general update. I think, we had presented some material to you all at the last GSPAC meeting. And, as we got towards the end, we had to kind of go quickly through some of that content. So we kind of offered, if folks were interested, GSPAC members were interested, we were willing to kind of meet one-on-one. And so I just wanted to share with the group, on Monday, we met with Sky and then Brenna. And then on Tuesday, we met with, this was last week. No, this was this week. I can't even keep it straight. We met with Sarah Ryan and Bethany, and really, I'll let them chime in if we have time on some of their concerns. But I think overall, it was very helpful for us, especially talking to Sky about trying to get some sort of boots on the ground experience specific to ET. Turns out, Sky, we have to actually purchase that ET information from the Western Weather Group in Chico. And so we didn't forget about that. And then Brenna, we got a chance to talk to her about maybe perhaps how agriculture might change within Big Valley, sort of over the next decade or two. And then obviously Sarah and Bethany, we had some really good conversations about sort of, what we know and what we don't know about the surface water, groundwater sort of interactions. Also sort of the concerns about schedules, things are moving very, very fast. We all realize that, but again, we've sort of been given this mandate to get the GSP put together. So again, letting this group know that, we're doing the best we can. We're trying to be as transparent as we can, but there's going to be opportunities in the future to as part of the 5-year updates to kind of move things, refine things as we kind of move forward. So if other GSPAC members are interested in sort of having a one-on-one meeting, I think it has to be one-on-one, just sort of the Brown Act compliance issue. We're happy to do that. Just let us know. I'm thinking Christy's probably giving me a dirty look, so we might want to move on. I don't know if we even have time to sort of get some feedback from some of the stakeholders we met with, but what's your thoughts, Christy? Peter's hands up. So
yeah, Peter, we'll go to Peter's comment. Peter?
A quick question. What is the process by which one can see what, and not just see in terms of written up stuff, but in other words, what information is being supplied by one party to you all to be able to critique whether or not that information is correct?
Sure.
And because amongst us, we know more about these subjects than anybody else.
Yeah.
That's really, really of great concern. I'm sure it's concern to others too, so.
Sure. Yeah, we're not, most of the information that we're bringing into the model itself is from public sources. We have to be really, really careful. Like, Peter, you provided some really good information on sort of the frost protection piece. We're going to try to incorporate some of that, but we're not cherry picking information from each stakeholder. We're trying to utilize public referenced peer reviewed resources if we can. And then as far as documentation, all of this document will be documented within an appendix of the GSP that dives into the model, provides all the inputs, where the sources of data came from. So we need to be very, very transparent on that. So I don't know if that addresses your question, but
yeah. I guess the concern is whether or not the information that's being provided to you is accurate. That's
Correct.
Just the worry.
Correct.
And because anyway.
Yeah.
I guess there isn't a very good way. Is the bottom of what my walk away is. There is no way to critique whether or not the information being provided to you by one party is factually correct. We just don't know that.
Well, Peter, I want to interject because I also provided information to the team, and I think if the information shows up, it'll show up in the plan, and at that point we can critique as we go along and question things that show up in the document. I had suggested some items that can't be incorporated into the model for various time constraints and lack of data, but could be mentioned throughout the document. And so in the process of doing this and in the public comment section, that's when we can make sure everything is accurate and characterized correctly.
Thank you very much. That's helpful, Brenna. And that's reassuring, Eddie. I know you all are extremely conscientious. I appreciate that so much. Yeah. And so I think I accept Brenna's explanation as a way of addressing it.
Right. And I think one ask, Christy, this will be the last, I promise, from you all is, we have to develop some future model scenarios. So what is the landscape of Big Valley going to look like in 10, 20, 30, 40 years? And so again, that's going to be something we're going to have to make happen here in the next week or two, but that's where, we need some input from locals. And I know Brenna has some opinions. We haven't, we're not going to incorporate those without checking with you, Peter, but there's, so we need to, work through that very soon. So.
Okay. Thank you.
And Eddie, I'll just point out that the couple of chats that have just come through too about, Bethany just acknowledging the time frame that we have and how accelerated it is as far as review. And then Sarah asking also about the full reference list, and anything that is used to advise or to construct the document would have to be contained as a component of the overall GSP itself.
Exactly.
What was used in order to support it.
And actually DWR requires us to upload every single, not just the reference, but the actual reference material. Everything has to be uploaded to DWR. So, yeah.
Okay. It's the Eddie show today. So we're moving on to agenda item number 6, GSP implementation and financing.
How much time can I have with this, Christy?
You had 10 minutes originally supported to it. We're running about 20 minutes behind.
Okay.
So again, still don't see anybody for public comment. So there might be some time to slide that around a little bit.
Great. All right. So I'm gonna go through this, and I'm just introducing this topic. Again, no decisions have been made, but hopefully you all realize that the cost to develop the GSP is actually coming through support from DWR. Okay. So the question is, okay, GSP gets submitted. Then what happens? Well, then you have to implement the GSP. There's going to be costs to implement the GSP. And so these items here, 1 through 9, really are things that we will include in chapter 5 of the GSP, or actually chapter 6 of the GSP, which is the GSP implementation section. But I just wanted folks to kind of start to think about, okay, now that once the GSP is submitted, we start implementing it, there's going to be a cost to that. And from what I've had some conversations with the county, they don't have the budget to kind of implement all of these required action items. So again, what I was going to talk about today are these 9 items that are listed. And so chapter 6 is where we're going to start to document all this information. Items 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 are items that are going to have to be funded somehow by the Big Valley GSA. These are sort of the administration of the GSP, the continued outreach and stakeholder involvement. We think there could be some resources from DWR post GSP implementation, but we don't know for sure. There's requirements through Sigma with annual reports, 5-year updates. We're looking at sort of, the water levels, the water quality, all that has to be sort of summarized annually and presented to DWR. So there's those costs. And then every 5 years, you have to provide a more refined update, a 5-year update. And that would be where, if more information comes out of the SkyTem example and we refine the model, then that's where that kind of information would get sort of uploaded. And again, this is required by DWR. Item 9, and again, no decisions have been made. This has to do with projects and management actions. So, there's 2 ways to kind of look at that. Should we sort of try to incorporate a projects and or management action cost into the GSP implementation fee, or do we try to capitalize on what we think are DWR grants that are going to be available in 2022 to sort of fund projects? So we all know that projects are going to cost probably, hundreds of thousands or tens of millions of dollars. Those are really hard and difficult for the locals to kind of resource or develop funding for. So that's why we're thinking, for the projects and, maybe some of the management actions, we would try to capitalize on grants. But the day-to-day administration and the reporting, I don't know that DWR is going to sort of have the funds to support that. In fact, I know they're not for the 2020 plans. So that's where we need to start having some discussion soon about funding, how it's going to look like, what it's going to look like. So I think if you go to the next slide, this is just from the Sigma legislation. So the GSA has the ability to impose fees if need be. I just want to kind of get that language up there. Folks always ask, can they do this legally? Yes, they can. Again, we'll kind of come back and talk about this a little bit later on, but there is a mechanism to implement fees for this GSA to support GSP implementation. Next slide. A couple of different ways that we've seen other GSAs sort of develop funding. There's 3 general ways. There's sort of a partner pay, go cash contribution. So that would be where perhaps the county kicks in a bit of money. The various water districts or CSDs would kick in a bit of money. I don't think that model is going to really work in Big Valley. And so I think the partner pay go cash contribution is probably not going to work. But again, at some point, we'll have some conversations about it. The Prop 218 is sort of a fee-based charge, and it has to go to the voters for approval, or in this case, it's a 50% protest. So it could be, you know, a 218 process or a parcel-based tax. So that's kind of what I've seen work in other GSAs. So it kind of goes to the vote, and then that's kind of how you work through the system. Again, at some point, we'll continue this conversation to try to work through what's the best mechanism for Big Valley to implement the fees. If you go to the next slide. There's pluses and minuses, as you can imagine, right, for charges. So, you know, ideally, it would be a cost per acre. But then the concern is, well, then everybody's paying the same amount. Is that fair for irrigators versus non-irrigators to pay? You know, again, we're hearing this in other basins, so we need to work through that. I think probably the best approach is a cost per acre foot. Again, there's challenges with that, right? If you're not metering, how do you work through that? And so you're kind of relying on other methods to kind of extrapolate pumping usage, like ET, land use, those kind of things. Or there's some kind of combination. So again, that's kind of the three sort of charge-based ideas or areas. We've been looking at some ideas where you would charge based on the well diameter. So if you've got a 6-inch or less well diameter, you'd be charged one fee. If it was larger, you would be charged another fee. Again, no decisions have been made. These are just concepts I want you all to start talking or at least be aware of. And there'll be more conversations to come through this group as we move through this process. Next slide. Again, this is just conceptual, but I just want folks to get a sense of what these GSPs cost post GSP or through GSP implementation. So a lot of information on these slides. This is just sort of showing the yearly budget for the next 5 years. Again, this is all conceptual. I just want folks to see, you know, there's legal fees that are involved. There's sort of the administration. So the administration, you know, this is again just an estimate. You can see the line items in there can be, you know, $250,000 a year. That's for the county just to kind of administer the GSP or the GSA, I guess it would be. And then I mentioned the reporting requirements. So those are the items that are below where you sort of see groundwater sustainability plan. Those items below the annual reporting, sub-basin coordination is probably, you know, it's going to be important, you know, especially with Scotts Valley at some point. 5-year updates. You also want to have the resources in place so when these grant opportunities come up, that the county's got the resources to apply for some of those grants. So, you know, that can be $170,000, $200,000 a year. So you start adding this up, again, this is just conceptual, you know, you're in the $300,000 to $500,000 a year that the GSA is going to have the resources to kind of move this forward. So I guess these are just concepts. We'll dive into the details at some point. But again, I want you all to be aware that this is something that essentially the county is, you know, I don't want to say they're on the hook for, but they're going to need the resources to make this move forward. And, you know, there's going to have to be some local fee structure to support the county. That's kind of what the take home message is. And so, you know, where are we going next with this? Ultimately, we need to develop some kind of realistic budget with you all. That'll happen. And then we need to figure out, okay, how would that sort of fee be allocated? Would it be parcels? Would it be per acre? Would it be per well? Would it be irrigated versus non-irrigated? We kind of have to work through that. And also that requires some legal opinion, you know, what's legally and what's not legally enforceable. You know, irrigated versus non-irrigated lands, it's you would think it's easy to track, but it's not. And so again, working through those is something we'll talk about. And then also the next step will be, okay, that's, you know, we've agreed on a budget. We've come up with some concepts on how that the revenue would be generated. We would develop some fee structure, you know, cost per acre, cost per parcel, irrigated versus non-irrigated, cost per well diameter. And then that would sort of be, you know, if we could get through that in the next couple of months, it would really be helpful. So I think with that, Christy, I think I'm done. Ibrahim, if you go to the next slide. Ibrahim with us? There we go. All right, so I'm done. So Christy, I don't know if you want to give folks a couple of minutes, just to, it's important to get some feedback. Just does everybody agree that, hey, the GSP has been developed with Prop 1, Prop 68 funds. Now it needs to be implemented. That's where, you know, there has to be the tough discussions about a revenue stream, a revenue structure, allocations of how that's paid for. And that's, you know, it's something perhaps that's new to folks, but it kind of has to happen. So I don't know, Christy, what do you think we want to do? I think David had a
Sure.
question.
Yeah, either David or Sky have a
Sure.
question.
Yeah, please. So looking at that, the, what was it, dollars per acre or dollars per, gallon charging? I don't see how any of that reflects use by special districts for residential customers. Are they part of this concept or?
They can be, yeah. If the GSA requires it, they can be. So what we've seen with special districts is they just generally end up footing the costs, and then they spread those costs back to the users. That's the way we've seen it in special districts.
But is that indicated in these slides you just showed us that they would be cost sharing?
But right now it's really general, Sky, conceptual. So we're not saying anything about user types, user groups, or anything like that.
Okay, and how many residents do we think? I'm just trying to get an idea how many dollars per year we're talking about per person. How many residents do we think we have in the basin?
We've got those numbers, and at some point we'll get into those details, but today it's just concepts. And so at some point I'll come back and I'll have all this information. We can kind of plug it into the total revenue dollars needed, and we can figure out what it is cost, not per person, but generally it'll be per acre, per parcel, per connection, something like that. So we'll have those conversations.
Person's important too. I mean, $500,000 spread over, how many people, how much is that per person per year? Just small government, big government, that kind of thing.
Yep. I can tell you in previous GSPs, the general costs have varied anywhere from, $1.50, $2 to $1.50 to $2 an acre, all the way up to maybe $25, $30 an acre. Or with pumping fees, I've seen it as low as $3 an acre foot, all the way up to $2,300 an acre foot. So it kind of gives you a range. I'm hoping we'll be on the lower end of that. So, if it was we'll have to dive into those details once we have the data, and we can get the data on, parcel size, acreage, residents, domestic wells, production wells, irrigated versus non-irrigated. We can get all that. And at some point we'll get everybody in the room, probably be in person, but initially we need to kind of agree on sort of the budget itself. So anyway, I think, was it David had a question?
No, work together.
Okay.
Yeah, they're together.
No worries.
So I think we'll go ahead and move on to that. And Eddie, just really quickly, for this next steps, will we see this at like future GSPAC meetings that we have coming up?
I think, it's kind of up to Marina. I think what we need to do is, that table that you saw previously, that was just my estimate based on what I know in other areas. And so I think we need to kind of flush that through Marina's group and Scott DeLeon. And then once they get maybe not the values, but just the line items, like legal, do you want to have legal fees in there or not? And so once we get that concept dialed in, then we bring it back to this group, perhaps even a working group of some sort to kind of work through, some of these numbers. And then ultimately, yes, it will come back to this group to talk about. I don't know if it'll be ready by October or not. So.
And to clarify, when you say that it goes to Marina, that is going through the Water Resources Department of the county and her role as that and as the administrator person for the GSA overall, and not as GSPAC lead necessarily. So just to clarify that difference.
Yeah, exactly. At the end of the day, sorry, Marina, but this is sort of on your shoulders. And so, this is the fee that has to be developed to support you. So we need to make your group. So we need to figure out how to, set that up. So.
All right. Well, now we can dive right into the big agenda item, as if all of that previously came before was not big, but go ahead, Eddie, you kicking us off?
Sure. So the first couple of slides here, you've seen them before. Hopefully everybody's familiar with. This is just sort of overview of what you've seen in previous GSPAC meetings. So SMCs, that's really kind of what's going to drive the GSP. We've talked about what is considered an undesirable condition, right? That's sort of a locally agreed upon qualitative decision. Hey, we don't want to see stakeholders' wells go dry. I mean, that's sort of that can be the gist of that condition. But that leads into the sustainable management criteria, and we've got the MOs, the MTs, and the interim milestones if they're needed. And so today, really, what we want to talk about is the MOs, the MTs, and then of course the undesirable result. Again, the undesirable results is locally developed. Okay, so are we okay with a number of percentage of wells dropping below the MT over 2 or 3 consecutive years. You all have seen this before, but I just want to kind of get everybody's minds back into this thing. So again, this should be a summary slide. Hopefully folks are very familiar with it. Acronyms, I know some of us hate them, some of us love them, but again, just making sure everybody understands. Sustainability indicators, that's the 6 SMCs, the 6 deadly sins that we're going to talk about. Although I won't give you a pop test on quiz on this, seawater intrusion is not one of them. So we only have 5 of the 6 deadly sins in Big Valley. Undesirable results. We're going to talk about what is an undesirable result that's locally developed. RMS is the representative monitoring network. Remember, we've got 2 networks in Big Valley. We've got the larger monitoring network, then we've got this more refined or representative monitoring network. SMCs are going to be set on the RMS network. MTs, that's what we want to avoid. That's kind of how we're going to be judged by DWR. You want to avoid dropping below the MT. MO is sort of the overall goal. That's where we'd like to get the ideal condition. Sky, I forget what you call the MOs and MTs. Maybe we should use your words, your sayings better. But and then the interim milestones is if we hit the MT, what's our plan to get back up towards the MO? And then baseline conditions really is just sort of, where are we at today? And so those are some general concepts. I've included an insert to the right that sort of lays out some of the regulations. Christy's making me move fast. Sustainable indicators, I've already kind of covered this. Of the 6 deadly sins, we're dealing with 5 of them: lowering of groundwater levels, a reduction of storage, degraded water quality, land subsidence, and surface water depletion. And then the metrics for those, again, everybody should be somewhat familiar with it. Lowering of groundwater levels, we're using water levels from wells. Reduction in storage is a volume. We'll probably use water levels as a proxy. Seawater intrusion is not an issue. Degraded water quality, we're going to use hopefully TDS, I think, is a proxy. Land subsidence, I think it should be quite clear by now that we don't have a land subsidence issue in Big Valley, but again, we want to keep track on that. And then the surface water depletion is sort of a volume, a rate of surface water depletion. And we're going to use water levels, a different set of water levels as a proxy initially, and then we're going to utilize the model and look at ways to fill data gaps to help sort of quantify that volume or rate moving forward. So again, that's sort of a quick overview on SMCs. The first bullet here, indicators incorporated into this GSP using specific SMCs. Water levels we mentioned, land subsidence we mentioned, water quality we mentioned, depletion of interconnected surface waters we mentioned. Indicators where we don't really have, we're going to use a proxy. So you probably heard the analogy where, if water levels are stable, the storage isn't going to change much. So we're using water levels as a proxy for groundwater storage. And then also seawater intrusion is not an issue in the Big Valley Basin. So I think with that, we're going to move on. Again, I think most of you all have seen this slide. It's sort of an interesting or important concept. So you can see the orange line, you see the blue line, that sort of represents a water level in this example, or groundwater storage, but it's really a water level. And then we've got an MT, that's what we want to avoid. If we hit the MT for a prescribed amount of time, that's considered an undesirable result. And then undesirable result would require either a project and or management action to get that, in this case, water level back up above the MT and ideally headed towards the MO. So that's just a general concept. I think if you go to the next slide, Ibrahim. So you all have seen sort of the SMC section. I think it went out, Sunday. Again, we're looking for some feedback on that. The way it's sort of laid out, we talk about the undesirable results first. So the potential cause, what would the effect be of the undesirable results? And then how were they identified? In this case, it's the MT exceedance, okay? Minimal thresholds, again, we have to lay those out, describe what the MT is, what is the quantitative measurement, and then, what applicable local, state, or federal state standards could be exceeded if we hit that MT. And again, the MO, that's what I think of the ideal condition. That's where we'd like to get to, but we're not going to really be judged on getting to that MO. It's just avoiding the MT. That's kind of what we need to work towards, is avoiding the MT. I think, Abraham, if you go to the next slide. All right, let me take a quick break here. Monitoring network, again, I mentioned this previously. We've got 2 monitoring networks, okay? We've got the broader network, which includes all of the wells that the county DWR manages or monitors as part of the CASGEM, and those are also the primary and voluntary network. So again, that's going to continue. That's always going to be there. and probably be expanded. And at some point, some of those wells could be incorporated as an RMS network, into the RMS network. So that's the broader network. I forget, William, how many wells is that now? 30, 40?
In Big Valley, it's 47.
Yeah, so that's a lot of wells. And then we take a subset of that and we try to select wells that we're considering representative wells that we include in the representative monitoring network. And you can kind of see with some of the challenges we've had today, trying to set MOs and MTs with the RMS network, which is proposed to be 6 wells. Imagine trying to do that with 47 wells. We'd probably be here till like 2027. So this representative monitoring network is going to be utilized to set the SMCs, the MOs and the MTs, and then those are going to be reported to DWR annually. And that's kind of what we're going to be sort of required to sort of monitor against. Another important factor is RMS are identified for each indicator, and many or may not be the same site. So we took your feedback. Ideally, what I wanted was I wanted to have the same well for all 4 or 5 SMCs, but we took your feedback and we've sort of refined the RMS wells to sort of, you know, account for, in this example, the surface water, groundwater depletion section of our wells. They're different than what we're using for the water level and water quality, because we felt like those wells were closer to the creeks and streams that are having some of these challenges. And as we look to fill data gaps, we want to make sure that we can include the current RMS wells for the surface water depletion piece, supplement those and get those closer to truly represent the surface water groundwater depletion. So that was a bit of a modification from probably the last discussion we had on this. And then we have to define the MOs and MTs for each RMS network or each RMS well. That's pretty standard. So let's talk about the RMS network. And if folks, you know, I know we've received some feedback on the network. If we've got time, we can have a quick chat about it. But really, the image that I'm showing here on the right, you can see all the wells, the 47 plus wells that are located. We've identified the RMS wells that are sort of highlighted with a blue circle, and they're in red. So that's our proposed network, the RMS wells, and that's for groundwater levels, groundwater storage, land subsidence, and groundwater quality. So that's kind of what we're proposing.
Eddie, are these set in stone now, or?
No.
It seems to me, and I don't know, I'd like to hear what anyone else thinks, but particularly for the agriculture, with the exception of the one that's near Kelsey Creek, the upper right-hand one there, all of these are kind of outliers they're on the fringe of actually where most of the water is actually getting pumped out of this basin.
Yeah. So there's a couple reasons. I mean, and I don't know if we have time to chat about it, but there's a couple reasons these particular wells were selected. One was we had really good understanding of how they were completed, so we knew the well completion report information. We had a pretty good historical record, and they seemed to represent the general trends in water levels within each one of these quadrants. So we felt like it was representative of the groundwater conditions within the general area. So that's kind of why we selected them. I think everybody had a chance to provide some feedback on the RMS network section. Ibrahim or Megan, I don't know if we have time to kind of talk about what kind of feedback we got, but yeah, I'll just kind of stop there. So Pat, your comments noted, and if you've got some feedback or better ideas, let us know, but it needs to happen sooner rather than later. And it can't be just based on an area. We need to have a historical record for that well, which we generally have a pretty good record for most of them, but we have long records for a lot of these wells. And you'll see as we start talking about water levels, we've made some changes based on your feedback on what period we're looking at over on the water level side of things. So we're looking at a pretty long historical record for our selection of our RMS wells. So I think,
this is Ibrahim. So Pat, we have sent out a packet with all of the 47 wells, describing, organizing them by grid section. And then we added summary of all the data that we have for these wells and which one we selected based on the availability of the data in the past, and also the also the well construction. But your point is well taken. And I think if you don't have the packet, we can send it back to you and kind of maybe provide maybe, and we'll also included the map with that packet. So if you have a better suggestion, let us know. So we can incorporate those in the process as we go. One idea would be as we go over the next few years, as the county get additional resources, I think the ideal situation is to go in and put in dedicated monitoring wells in these specific, in central location within each one of the grid section if we want to, and understand the construction and we have a better data. But we will be more than happy to send you that information packet.
That would be great. Thank you.
Okay, Ibrahim, next slide.
Really quickly,
Oh.
Eddie, so Bethany asked to please confirm there's a different set for depletions.
There is. That's the next slide. I'm excited. I think it's the next slide.
No, next slide's mine.
We
No,
do.
we'll cover it later when we come
we
back
have
to the depletion. We will show the network for depletions.
Yeah, and we worked hard on it. So no, we recognize that the change. So yeah. All right. All right, Christine.
Bethany, and you can keep us honest. If you don't see it readily, then you're welcome to poke us again.
Yeah.
Really quickly, I wanted to insert something in this process before we dive into SMCs. And I forgot the most important part of this whole component of the agenda item is that, yes, we're going to take a break and give everybody a chance for a break. What we'll do is we'll probably get through one or two of the SMCs, and then we'll take a quick 5-minute break. So we'll just kind of evaluate that. So yes, you'll get a break. But before we started to dive into the actual SMCs, I wanted to quickly go over what the role of the GSPAC is that's set out by the charter document that everybody helped put together. And just to remind everyone of kind of what the charge is and what the outcome is for GSPAC. And you can read the two kind of key pieces of the outcomes there of that. Products and recommendations from this group will be transmitted to the Lake County Board of Supervisors, that is the standing board of directors for the BPGSA, and that those recommendations will identify all of your perspectives on agreements, disagreements, main key points that were noted, things that were seen as data gaps, those type of things. And those are reflected in our notes that we have as we go along, both from the meeting summaries and then anything that's brought before the board as a moment when they need to make a decision on something, they'll be brought forward as recommendations with the notes. But in order to advise those recommendations from GSPAC, we have to have some kind of mechanism to show them where people fall on agreement of those. And so what we've turned to and what we identified in the charter was this gradient scale of agreement scale. And it allows everyone to give thoughtful input that is not a yes or no answer, because this isn't an appointed elected type board that has a voting structure to it. We thought that this might be the most helpful way to be able to work through where people stand for the different proposed things like SMCs and those type of things. So as we move through the SMCs today, we're going to use this scale. What I've asked the project managers to do is, as we move through each one of the SMCs, to kind of get a pulse check with what people are feeling about what the proposed language is for each SMC. And at the end, we'll take an actual roll call that will just be a roll call with where kind of you are on this continuum, just what is your number. And we can note out of the discussion that we have with each of the SMCs, what the things are that you're thinking. And I would just ask that as if you are a 5 or a 6, which a 6 is a, yeah, no, I can't stand behind this at all, to give some constructive and very specific feedback in what type of things would need to happen in order to get you to move to the 1, 2, 3 side of that continuum. So just, I think we're at the point now where we're having to make some really key thought processes that get us to those recommendations so that we can move on to the next phases of the GSP. So if there is something that it's a hard no for you, please also pair that with something that's a constructive, I'd like to see this, and to be very specific with it. So again, as the project managers work through with each of the SMCs and we discuss it, at the end, we'll take a pulse check of each of them. And at the very end, we'll take an actual roll call of numbers for each one of the SMCs, and that will appear as a bubble chart that will then go to the board of directors of where people are on the continuum, and then it'll be paired right with the commentary, the agreements, the disagreements, the main points that come from our discussions as part of this as well. So any questions on that process? Okay. All right.
Okay, Ibrahim, next slide. All right, so we're going to jump into the first one is chronic lowering of groundwater levels. And just a quick recap. I know we've presented some of this information a couple of times where we had provided sort of a historical groundwater elevations at specific wells. And so one of the concerns was, initially when we talked about SMCs for water levels, kind of my initial recommendation was, I'm not that interested in what happened prior to 2014, 2015 when Sigma was implemented. It was obviously a concern for this GSPAC that they wanted us to look at the entire historical record. So that's kind of what we did in some cases going back, 50, 60 years. So some of this information, specifically to the water levels, is looking at the long-term historical record. So let me walk you through this slide, because the next couple of slides have the similar content. So on the far left, you've got depth, and that's feet below ground surface. Let's kind of keep everything in feet below ground surface for now and not incorporate groundwater elevation. And then across the top, these are the actual wells from the specific quadrants that are for the proposed RMS wells. So we have 6 of them. And then as you kind of move through the graphic itself, so maybe just look at the sort of the 14N09W north quadrant, just sort of for the example. So the dark green bar that Ibrahim's showing there with the cursor, that's the highest spring groundwater, depth to groundwater we've ever seen within the basin, right? Then if you go to the next light, okay, we'll go there first. And then if you go to the sort of darker brown, that's the lowest spring depth of water we've ever seen at that particular well. So we know those are sort of the extremes, high and low. So when we started talking about where to set our MOs and MTs, what we're proposing is in each one of these, the lighter green, that is the proposed MO. That's the goal. That's where we'd like to get to. And you'll say, well, why did you set the MO below the highest spring? We wanted to build in some sort of operational flexibility. So in this case, what we did was we took the difference between the high and the low spring levels, and then we just essentially took 20% of that. So again, do you want it 10%? Do you want it 5%? I don't really have a strong preference, but this is just sort of the concept that we're kind of proposing. Keep in mind, well, not necessarily for the MO, but for the MT, if we want to be more aggressive on the MT, that's going to require sort of, management and projects to get there. And there's going to be a cost to that. So we need to kind of factor that in, at some point into the future. So anyway, hopefully, does everybody understand the concept of the high spring and low spring colors? Hopefully, I see some folks nodding. And then on the MOs, we're proposing the light green as the MO at each one of these wells. And then the minimum threshold, sort of similar fashion, we're looking to have the difference between the high and the low spring levels and adding an operational flexibility of about 20%. So you can see what we're proposing for the MT, which again, we hope we never get there, but that's sort of once we hit that level, for a certain amount of time, there needs to be a project and or management action brought in place to bring that back up. That's what we're kind of proposing for the MT. So we've got MOs are light green, and then the minimum thresholds are in the orange color for each one of the 6 well locations. Are there any questions sort of on the concept before we kind of get into the details? David or Sky, you have a question?
Yeah, Eddie, this is David. So I understand the sort of the scheme here, but would a threshold be triggered after just one event, or would it be one event in one of these wells, or would it be 2 years in a row? Or
yeah, we're going to talk about that. So just table that question. I'll get you the answer. I promise. I mean, not the answer, our suggestion. So yeah.
Eddie, I have 2 other questions. I have one from Sarah and one from Pat. So Sarah, if you want to go first.
Yes, so the minimum threshold then is set below the lowest that has been recorded in spring.
Correct.
So why would, so that's basically saying that the minimum that we've ever had is still okay in terms of meeting all of the sustainability criteria.
It's not, no, it's not saying that. It's just, that's what we're proposing. And I'll show you the logic behind that in a couple of slides. If that's not what folks want to do, if they want to set it at the lowest spring, we're okay with that. But again, this is just a concept. Let me explain in a couple of slides why we chose that level.
Okay.
Pat, did you have something to interject?
Yeah, when you're talking about chronic lowering of groundwater levels, you're not talking about seasonal like we're having right now with the drought and it goes down. If we come back with a normal winter or 2/3 of a winter and we come right back up to normal, you wouldn't consider that chronic lowering, would you?
No, I would not. No, and we can include some language in there that we talk about, you know, if water levels respond back, you know, after a drought to within the MO and MT, that would not be considered an undesirable condition. So we'll include some language. Yeah, we can't control droughts. So in the management. So.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to keep moving forward here. So again, this is a similar graph, but all we did is we sort of superimposed the 2015 and 2021 spring levels, just so folks get a sense of where they're at today. If we were to set the MO and MT at these proposed levels, you know, how would that compare today or back in 2015, which is a dry condition? So you can see in 2015 for, you know, what, 4 of the 6 wells, we would be, you know, close to the MO. And then you can see in one of the wells towards the southwest, we were well below the MO. And then it just kind of gives you a sense of kind of where, you know, what imagine if we were sort of implementing Sigma 5 years ago and we decided to set these MOs and MTs, you know, how would we be doing? Well, from our recommendation, I think we would, you know, in 5 of the 6 wells, we would be okay. One of the wells, I think we're heading in the wrong direction. So there'd have to be some, you know, adaptive management, ideally that we'd put in place before we hit the undesirable condition. But it just kind of gives you a perspective on where we would be if we set the MOs and MTs, again, 5 years ago and looked at a 2015 spring level and a 2021 spring level. Does that make sense to folks? Okay.
Where is the 2015 line on that last well?
I think it's the same, right, Ibrahim? It's just, it's hidden underneath the dark blue line.
Correct. It's the same level, and both of them corresponding to the lowest spring level 2.
Thank you.
So again, the MO is important because that's kind of where we'd like to get to, but you know, from DWR's perspective, you know, they're going to be judging us on avoiding not causing an undesirable condition, which is related to the MT. So let's talk a little bit about the MT, which I think is the next slide, Ibrahim.
Peter, did you have a quick question on the last one or anything?
Very, very quickly. That well out in the southwest has always been a puzzle to me, and it's never been clearly identified its location as being somewhere south of Highway 29. I would hope we'd come back to that when we talk about these locations.
Sure.
I'm really troubled by that well.
It just doesn't fit. No, I agree. And we've seen, like, just with the TDS value from the one well that had the really high TDS, there's something wrong with, generally it's a well construction issue, or there's some little, you know, challenge with, you know, the physical structure of it. But I agree. So we've had some internal discussions about that. So
thank you.
Yeah. So let's talk about the MT. So when we develop the MTs and the undesirable condition, you know, it has to be, we have to kind of come up with a metric on why are we choosing the MT. And so again, this is just our experience working in other subbasins and basins, is what we looked at really was what impacts they would have on generally domestic wells. We have a pretty good data set from DWR on well depths within the basin. None of them have been field checked. None of them, you know, We don't incorporate the age of the well. So in some cases, if wells were put in, 60 years ago that were 30 feet deep and water levels now are 60 feet deep, it doesn't include that kind of information. But again, we're just trying to work with what public information we have, available data we have. So let me walk you through this. So again, the content is the same. The only difference is we've got some little diamonds on there, and you can see that the diamond size varies based on the depth of where a certain percentage of wells, generally domestic, but it can be agriculture, would be impacted. Okay. Now, we don't know if that's the case because sometimes folks are not reporting. Again, we're utilizing a data set that a lot of it has not been field checked, but it gives us a sense of, hey, Eddie, if we set an MT as an example in the North well of, let's say that the minimum threshold is set at, I don't know what that is, 25 feet below ground surface. If we hit that MT, we probably would not impact any of the wells in that area because generally the wells would not get impacted until they drop down 30 feet. Water levels would not, wells wouldn't get impacted unless water levels drop down to 30 to 40 feet. So in that area, setting that MT is probably not going to impact any of the shallow wells. Okay, and then you can see next to each of the wells, I have a number. There's a number there in red. That represents the number of wells within that quadrant. So it kind of gives, when we're talking about 5% or 10%, you get a sense of how many wells could potentially be impacted. So let's look at another, let's go to the Southwest. And
Eddie, Bethany has a quick question for you.
Sure.
Yeah, so the MTs are based on spring level, and
Right.
presumably a lot of the wells are pumping, besides domestic wells, the agricultural pumping is happening in the summer.
Right.
And fall or whenever it starts to, crops need water. So I'm having trouble with this because this is representative of what is happening in spring.
Sure. And again, that's a valid point. What my sort of perspective is, we know water levels are going to fluctuate more in the fall. The water levels are going to drop more in the fall. But if things recover in the spring back to normal levels, then, that's okay. We don't need to implement a project and or management action. So if we set a fall level and then all of a sudden there's a panic, but we get a wet winter or water levels recover in the spring, do we really need to implement that project and or management action? So that's why my preference is spring, to use spring levels as a proxy. I've heard folks argue for the fall. That's a local decision that we need to, obviously get figured out as well. But this analysis is based on spring levels. So, and I think the packets, all the data packets we sent for folks to review, well, they had all water levels on them. So yeah. So we're proposing spring. So that's hopefully addresses your question.
So like 5 or the depth greater than 5% of wells, that means that's the depth where 5% of the wells have a greater depth than that, or
5% of the wells would be impacted. So if the water level, as an example, let's look at the North well. If water levels drop down to 40 feet, 20% of the domestic wells of wells could be impacted based on our analysis. Yeah.
Okay. So this is saying like in spring, if we meet the minimum threshold in spring, like for instance at the North well, there's probably about 10 feet of water change that can happen before 5% of the wells start to get affected.
Correct. Yeah.
Or go dry, I guess.
That's the question, is it because some of these are not we're not monitoring these. So this is just based on our best. I mean, it's more than a guess, but it's based on what information we have on where those wells are. Some of them might not even be used. We've done the analysis where we've done a domestic well survey, which actually would help us because some of these wells either perhaps are not even being utilized, and some of them might have been abandoned and not used. I mean, they're not even in existence. So
or deepened. I mean, this is a very important point too. And I think Eddie, you're going to talk about the Southwest well. I mean, even in the highest recorded spring we have in this well, that level is still below 5% of the wells,
right,
based on the recorded DWR. So the question is, there's something wrong either within the DWR data or within these within the reported data. The lowest spring basically presume about more than 60% of the wells is impacted at the spring. And again, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So again, we're using the best data we have available, but we, I think one of the strongest recommendation we'll be making is to do a field survey to verify the domestic wells and use that to update the MTs.
Yeah.
Pat, did you have a question?
I do. Before we set these MTs, are we going to have an idea of how deep these aquifers are in where these wells are? I mean, the reason I ask is I used to have a home on Soda Bay Road, and the domestic well for the house was, you know, there were two of them. One was 20 feet and one was 30 feet deep. We drilled another one 100 feet deep and couldn't get, I mean, there was so much water in there, we couldn't keep the hole open. And so obviously we've got changing conditions, or look, you know, if things are getting more difficult, are we going to start setting these MTs based on the guy that's got a 20-foot well that still has 100 feet of water underneath as well?
Yeah.
I think that has to be a big consideration on where those are set, because it might just be that some people need to get deeper. I mean, historically, like in the 1977 drought, a lot of these wells went dry.
Right.
They'll probably having problems this year. But if if those same property owners have, you know, 50 feet of gravel under their existing well and water in that area, how do we look at that and how do we process that?
Yeah, so I can tell you what we've done in other basins is we actually do a domestic well inventory analysis. And I think, like, as an example, in that southwest well location, you're saying 5%, that our prediction is 5% of the wells are already dry. I have a feeling a lot of those wells are, you know, either abandoned, no longer used, or deepened. So that kind of information would fall off. But again, you know, we don't have time to do the domestic well analysis, and the depth information for the wells, that's just a proxy to set the MT. So that's, you know, this is kind of the information we have to set the MO. I think is pretty straightforward, but on the MT is the data sets we have in house is all we have time for right now. So
Eddie, David or Sky has a question.
Sure.
Yeah, it's Sky. So it's kind of a broad ranging comment, but the MTs, you know, and the folksy term I've used is the alert or action level.
Right.
And thank you for acknowledging that. But I actually think we need two levels. I think we need an alert level and we need an action level. And then to carry on to the spring versus the fall, I think the alert level should happen in the fall and the action level would happen in the spring. But I don't know, if you had a spring, only do the spring level, when would people know then that they had to make drastic changes in their practices for that current year?
Yeah,
I mean, if that's going to come out, what, in like May 1st, I think that's kind of late to let residents know that there's an issue.
Yeah, well, there will be, and we'll write this into the GSP, adaptive management that happens. So back to your example, Sky, if we hit an MT once in the spring, that's going to be alerted. It's going to come up in the annual report. And so there can be some adaptive management that occurs, but the undesirable result will not happen just over a 1-year period. It's a 2-year period, and then it has to happen in more than one well, more than one RMS well. So we can include some of that adaptive management in the GSP, but the physical MT and MO has to be a value that's inserted, you know, into the GSP and it's been required by DWR. If we choose to come up with, you know, different MTs or interim MTs, or, you know, like you mentioned, Sky, we can do that. We're going to lump that as adaptive management. So,
and just kind of to chime in here, maybe kind of maybe kind of take a step back and think about two conditions, broadly two different conditions that we're kind of thinking about. One condition is looking at the long-term health of the basin, and is the basin and managed sustainably, and then you'd see year over year over year over year, the groundwater condition is just going down, the elevation is going down, is just going down. And that is what Sigma and the GSP and the MTs and the MOs are looking at, this long-term health of the basin and how you're managing it over time. So that's one way to look at it. The other way, the other concern is during extreme droughts or drought condition, and especially during the fall and summer, when we know the basin is, and actually is long-term, the basin is in a good shape, but short-term, we have this drought challenge, wells going dry, extensive use. What we can do about that? This short-term challenge and condition is not managed through the MTs and the MOs. This will need to be managed through what we call the adaptive management. So the GSA within itself, as part of this plan, we can put in an adaptive management, can say, hey, if we're entering a drought and we set up a mechanism, start seeing wells going dry, then the GSA will take this action. The GSA will investigate, evaluate how many wells, where are these wells are happening? Are they all congregated in a specific location? Because then the response could be different. Because again, this will become a localized issue and short-term issue. Are these wells going dry because there is an extensive groundwater extraction in one part of the basin? The GSA can come in and kind of ask for different water management practice. Like everyone kind of maybe manage their water use differently or extraction differently to lessen the impacts. That's one. Maybe it's isolated. Some landowners have impacted because of their specific geological setting, their wells, how the GSA can help them through the county, provide funding through the state, link them with other emergency action to deepen their well or provide additional water supply. So these, as we put this, just think about them as two separate issues. The long-term health of the basin, this is what we're looking at through the MTs and MOs, versus the short-term acute conditions.
And to follow up with that, Bethany, just had a really quick question about the adaptive management actions, when those would be out for review, where they would be and when they would be out for review.
We plan to include those as part of the project and management actions. It's coming out next week on the 15th.
And then Bethany had a previous question that had about domestic wells. Does that mean agricultural wells are already well documented in terms of depth and screen depth?
All wells. I'd say
No.
all wells, yeah.
Okay.
We're using the same source for all wells from DWR. So I guess, Christy, you want to go to the next slide? So I think you know, these are general concepts, but let's just kind of bring this conversation, or at least the concepts to the end here. So MTs, kind of what we're proposing is we're proposing the lowest historical spring groundwater elevation plus an operational flexibility margin at each RMS well of about 20%. And then the MO would be the highest historical spring groundwater elevation ever, which I'm just letting you know, I don't know if that's ever been done in it hasn't been done in any of the GSPs that I've been involved with, but I admire you for being that aggressive, plus an operational flexibility at each RMS well. So that's the MOMT concept. And then the undesirable results, what we're proposing is when a spring groundwater elevation at 33% of, or 2 out of the 6 RMS wells exceed or fall below that specific MT for 2 consecutive years, that would be considered an undesirable result and then would require a project and or management action. So I think, you know, and then as far as the interim MOs, I can explain that a little bit later on. Essentially, the interim MO, or the milestones essentially, are if we hit the MT, how do we get back up towards the MO? But that's something I can detail out in a little bit later on. So really, I would like to focus really on the MT, MO, and then the UR. And I think, Christy, if you go to the next slide. Yeah, this is just backup. So if you just go back to slide 39, sorry. I guess with that, Christy, it would be nice to sort of maybe do sort of a unofficial poll of
Sure.
what folks think, just so we can kind of gauge it. And then again, I think we're going to come back and revisit this towards the end. So
Sure. So if I could ask everybody if they will, in the chat function, to just put a preliminary number along that level of scale of how you feel about this S&C proposed language and concepts.
So like 1 through 6, right? It's kind of,
Yep.
there you go. Yeah.
Oh, there you go. And those were also forwarded to the GSPAC members. They have them via email this morning too, if you just need to pull it up on your own screen and to view it.
And just a clarification, is this only for GSPAC members or for all participants?
This is for GSPAC members. I have no problem with asking other folks if they want to chime in too. That's fine. What would be carried forward in the chart and the recommendations would be the GSPAC members and all of the concepts that we've talked about. But
Thank you.
mm-hmm.
You want to ask a question?
Well, yeah, I don't understand what we're voting on.
We're not, Sky, we're not voting. What we're doing is we're saying that what the proposed language is and the concepts, the elements, the MTs, MOs, and the undesirable results that have just been discussed, where you feel about them on this continuum. Is it something that you fully endorse? Up to was something you completely reject, and or any of those that are in between. And I would ask again that if there is a 5 or 6 that you're feeling, to help us understand and to provide some very constructive, very specific feedback on what might move you to the 1 through 3 side of that scale.
Yeah, I see everyone is kind of putting like a 2 or 3. I like the 3s.
Mm-hmm.
And because what for us and the technical team will be valuable is also provide us some guidance on what we need to do to get it to the next, to get it to 1.
So we have 6 of the 8 who have chimed in with it, and looks like all 2s and 3s.
All right, perfect.
Yep.
Let's take it from the top, then Christy, and
sure.
Let's see if what we need to do.
Okay. So I would say 2 or 3s are actually pretty good. I don't know if you want more feedback or more specific about what the little details are.
3 is conditional agreements. So I want to kind of see what condition
sure.
and what specific they want. Maybe Brenna, have your hands up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I don't want to speak for the entire group, but I think, some of us are going to prefer a more aggressive approach in setting MOs and MTs. Some of us are going to prefer a more conservative approach, kind of based on our position on the committee, how we prioritize sustainability in the basin. So that's probably reflecting in the 3s that probably the people that would prefer the more aggressive approach would rather have MOs and MTs set closer to, lowest groundwater levels, and others that want a conservative approach would rather have more flexibility built into the system. I know for me personally, I feel comfortable moving forward with what the technical team has brought forward, given the data and your management of other basins and trying to find an unbiased viewpoint that kind of incorporates most concerns from a wide swath.
Christy,
want to go next?
Yeah, Christy, do you have feedback from everyone?
Yeah.
Okay.
That is no. Sky, I don't have yours registered. I don't know if you want to register it on David's, or if you want to text me, you're certainly welcome to do that, and I can put it up there. Again, these are preliminary numbers. This isn't the actual roll call that we were doing at the end, knowing that a lot of these are interconnected too. So
maybe
okay. Yep, we have everybody.
Pat, you have 3. What you would like to see?
I would like address what Eddie was talking about before, with if we show some wording in there, if we show that it recovers after a normal winter, how that's dealt with. Also, I think what Brenna was talking about, how the thresholds and the MT and the MO are, dialed in is probably, I think your model, you're still not determining where you're going to put your thresholds, but in a sense, the model, the way you're talking about, works for me. I'm probably closer to a 2 than a 3 if we can address the
recovery
how it
and
recovers
dry.
in a normal
Yeah.
winter.
Okay. David?
Yes, my concern is really that southwest well seems like an anomaly relative to the rest. And so I'm concerned that be removed or replaced with something else. But otherwise, I think generally I feel okay about the protocol or the method by which you're proposing to, use these other wells for proxies on the state of the groundwater basin.
Thank you. Peter?
Yeah, I concurred with David's perspective. Same, Southwest Welsh needs to go. That's an outlier.
Yeah.
There's something wrong with it.
Sarah?
I'm not good with, with us saying that, it's okay for some of these wells to, for the measurable, the minimum threshold to be indicative of some wells going dry. I don't know, the financial considerations of people and whether they can make their wells deeper. So yeah, I would really like to see the minimum threshold be moved up closer or above the loss of any wells going dry. But in general, I can I guess approve the concept of how you're doing this.
Pat has his hand raised. Pat, did you have a comment on something that you wanted to?
Yeah, I would also agree that southwest well is an issue and probably not representative of the whole basin. So I'd like to see it out of there also.
Sky?
Yeah, well, I'm having a hard time with using the spring levels exclusively, even though I think I understand this idea of adaptive management, but without current data right now about the number of accurate current data about the number of dry wells in the basin, it's really hard for me to look at the 2021 line as being relevant to, a lot of people, because what really counts is, if we're talking about dry wells, it's the fall level. And, I don't know, historically, my sense is that we usually get a huge recharge in the spring, but I can't verify that through data. I'm just thinking in the spring level, I'm just having a hard time with using only the spring level. And also, I'm having a hard time of waiting until I think we're talking about May to being told that I'm not going to be able to use water. And I think that's what this approach is telling me. Without strong adaptive management considerations and really without seeing the current dry well, seriously good data on current dry wells, it's hard for me to support or really put a lot of confidence in that 2021 curve. And yeah, the southwest well for sure is out of range and needs to be reevaluated. But
okay.
And I'm not sure exactly how far we're going back. If we're just talking about that chart with all these green and brown bars and all that, I think that approach is probably fine. But again, spring versus fall is huge to me.
Okay. We will try to address the fall situation in the adaptive management and pull some data to kind of provide some additional guidance on the adaptive management piece to help with that. Marina, quick question. Do we have information on the owners of the well that went dry or any other information beside their general location?
From the reports that have been submitted to the dry well tracking?
Yes. Do we have access to those?
We should have the APN number. I should be able to find the owner contact information, especially if they've been reported to environmental health.
Okay. If you send us the APN, we'll try to look them up and try to find if we have some construction information on them.
Will do.
Thank you.
I think also just to chime in really quickly on the wells that we're using to, sort of support the MTs, keep in mind, some of those wells maybe don't even exist anymore. And some of them could be past their sort of life cycle costs. So, I think one of the recommendations in the projects chapter will be to conduct a thorough domestic well inventory analysis, maybe a basin-wide inventory analysis, so we can really look at this in more detail. Because again, the average sort of life cycle of a domestic well, is 30 to 40 years. So some of these wells, if they're 60, 70 years old, do you really want to take those, into account when you're looking at sort of this analysis? So again, that'll be a recommendation in the project.
There is an uncertainty factor. Christy, did I miss anyone?
Yeah, there's two. So we need to hear from Marina and from Scott.
Scott?
I'm okay with most of it. I'm just kind of not exactly sure why they set the MO at the highest ever recorded level. It seems, I don't know, I guess it's ambitious, but that's what we're trying to get to. But it seems like maybe it should be, I don't know, 90% of it or something less than the actual highest.
Yeah.
Level, but that's just my.
I mean, we can look at some of the charts here on the next few slides, just quickly flip through them. But what we observed is when you look at the Big Valley, groundwater elevation since going back to the 1940s, except for few instances, most of them has remained fairly stable. They kind of goes down in the fall and they come up, and so they maintain within the same stable range. And so that kind of becomes one indication why we use that. Marina?
Yeah, I'm leaning more towards it too, but just echoing the statements from previous GSPAC members, especially Sarah Ryan and Brenna Sullivan.
Thank you.
Before we move on about this, given that we're in the 2 to 3 ranges and we're not seeing any 4, 5s, or 6s, do we want to potentially go ahead and record these numbers as kind of the roll call of where we're at, along with the paired commentary as well, rather than waiting to the end to try it again? Or would you rather go through the other things?
No, I think it was good. I think we're good.
Okay. If I could just ask, I know Marina said she was leaning more towards 2. If you put 1 or something else, if you could put in the chat just your single 1 number, that would be great, because I can't put you at 2 different places on the continuum. So if you gave the answer of 2 or 3, if you could just revise that to be just 1 number. And then what I'll do is I'll record those numbers. They get paired again collectively with all the commentary as we go forward. Do you have more, Eddie, that you want to talk about specific to the SMCs, or is this a good place for us to take just a quick 5-minute bio break for everybody?
Let me flip through the charts, and
Sure.
then it will take me like 2 minutes, and then we can take a 5-minute break.
Sure. Do you want me to clock you at that 2 minutes, Ibrahim?
60 seconds, seriously.
No worries.
Yeah. So this is kind of the charts that we've shown. So all of the dark dots, very hard to see here, is all of the water level measured. We highlight the spring in the orange circles. So these are the spring levels, and these are all the other observed data. And then we have these lines. So the top line is the maximum spring. And then this one here is the lowest spring. And then the green line is the 5th percentile of the wells. 20 percentile of the wells, and as in red. So you can see the range of spread for this well is about almost 30 feet from top to bottom. This well, this is in the northwest. Again, the levels are kind of none of the wells will be impacted by any of the observed data sets we have. This is the west central well. Again, you can see the pattern. There is few observation back in 1975, 76, corresponding to the drought, where it shows like almost 20% of the wells maybe got impacted during that time. But since then, as you can see here, the groundwater elevation are much, the most recent range is much more narrow range. This well is in the east central region. Again, you can see similar pattern. Wells going back in the 1950s, 1960s, groundwater elevation. You can see those again happening in the 2000 and up to 2017, 18 wet years. And that's kind of why we feel that the basin is kind of in fairly good shape, because again, the ground elevation, we didn't see a strong trend of something going like this. This is what DWR wanted to avoid, but everything seemed like fairly stable. This is the southwest well, the problematic well, and again, I'm not sure if it is just the well is off or where it is being screened, but it shows that many of the water elevations as kind of exceed 10% of the wells or even 20% of the wells. You can see all of this observation happening here, even in the recent past. And I'm not sure if that is correct or not. So either the well data, problem with the well data, or problem with the well itself. And so that's something we will be looking into. What's that, 60 second, Christy?
Yes, and David had a follow-up question. David, do you want to just ask it, or do you want me to read?
Just Ibrahim, I see that there are black dots and yellow dots, and the yellow dots are the spring water levels. What are the observed water levels?
So this is all water levels outside the spring. So any time of the year, like January, February, summer, fall, all of the data we have. This is every single data point we have.
So are those measured by the county as well in the network that they're checking the
Correct.
58 wells or whatever?
Yes, they're measured by the county and DWR and the county, yes.
But aren't those done either fall or spring?
For most of the wells, yes, either fall or spring.
So can I conclude then that those are fall readings because the yellow ones are the spring readings?
For the most part is yes. And I just hesitant to say absolutely yes. It's for the most part, that statement is correct. Some wells are monitored monthly. So you see a lot more data points.
I see.
Yeah.
But only recently. What's up with that?
Skies, that circled area that you've got on this particular chart, Sky was asking about what's up with those. Those are below.
That's the same question we're asking.
Yeah. Oh, I see.
Yeah. I mean, those indicates that more than 20% of the wells in that region went dry in 2008, 2008, and 2015.
Yeah, that's noteworthy.
But the question is that true?
Ah.
And we don't know. Okay. Might as well do this one before the break, Eddie.
Sure. So this is related to reduction of groundwater storage. And so what we're kind of proposing is sort of the bathtub analogy. You know, if water levels are stable, then there's not a lot of change in storage. So we're proposing to utilize the same MOs and MTs that we use for water levels as a proxy for reduction of groundwater storage. So I think, Christy, if you go to the next slide, I think that's probably the only slide we have in that. Or go, Ibrahim. Yeah, so that's it really. We're saying we're going to use it as a proxy. So the thought is if you know water levels are stable or we agreed on the MOs and MTs for water levels, then we'd like to use this as a proxy for storage.
Would you like to go ahead and do the roll call for that right now too, prior to?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in theory it'd probably be the same, but sure, just to kind of go through it. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. So if everybody could put in the chat if what your number is on that continuum of agreement with it for the second SMC. I don't know if you want to back up a slide, Ibrahim, and just leave it on the second one. I feel like the teacher who says, if all the homework's turned in, then I'll let you go. Take a break.
are you going to put back the slide that we're voting on?
Yeah, Ibrahim, if you wouldn't mind just moving it back one. There you go.
Are we voting on the bathtub? Is that, now I'm confused
Yes.
what we're doing.
Yeah, that one, reduction of groundwater storage. The bathtub
Okay.
analogy, yeah.
All right.
Eddie, can I ask you a question? This is David.
Absolutely.
While we're voting. So again, the storage is what's available to be filled, or it's what's in inventory, or
It's
or the
reduction of
total
storage.
size of the bathtub.
Yeah, it's ensuring that we don't reduce the size of the bathtub. That makes sense?
Regardless of where the water level is at any given time, it's the size of the bathtub.
Correct, but we're going to use water levels as a proxy to kind of understand that.
So if the water levels go up or down, that doesn't mean that the bathtub is getting bigger or smaller, right?
The volume changes.
The volume in inventory, but the volume of the bathtub doesn't change, right?
The volume of the bathtub would change. If water levels came up, then the volume of that water in storage would change.
But the capacity, I guess I'm trying to figure out what you mean. Is it the capacity of the bathtub, or is it
Correct.
the amount of water in the bathtub?
Amount of water in the bathtub.
Yeah, the amount of water in the bathtub, yeah.
Okay. So, okay. I stand by my vote or my number.
Perfect. Can we get a 10-minute break? Yep. Everyone has done well.
Yes, that's very true. You know, and I'm not going to give everybody a 10-minute break. I apologize. So I'm going to give everybody a 5-minute break, a 6-minute break. How about that? So we will reconvene at 1:10. when the lead facilitator is still trying to finish lunch. See if everybody's back here and accounted for.
I am back, but I will be shoving my face with food, so I'm
And
gonna be
totally fine.
I'm gonna be
You know.
turning my video off.
I figure that may be a case for most people. So if you all could just put a little, just to make sure that you're accounted for in the chat, if you could just put that you're back, you just put yes, that you're back. That would be great. And we won't require people to turn on their video and unless you're having something really good for lunch.
Yeah, I was gonna say, although I think John's eating pizza and that looks really yummy, I'm jealous he's not sharing.
Thanks, Pat. Thanks, Brenna, for letting us know. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Dave and Sky. Thanks, Marina. I think we have Scott and Sarah, who are only two that we're still just waiting to make sure that they get back.
I'm here.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Scott. All right.
All right.
Eddie, proceed.
Ding, ding, round two. Okay, the next two we're going to cover, we've touched on before. It seems like we had some pretty good agreement on those, but let's touch on them anyway, cover them. So the third SMC is land subsidence, just big picture. We're not seeing any land subsidence in Big Valley. And again, when we're talking about land subsidence, it's in relation to groundwater extraction. So we're not seeing it, but we want to keep tabs on it. So what we're proposing is utilizing satellite-based subsidence monitoring. DWR has done this in the past a couple of times. We've been told it's going to happen yearly now. And so what we're looking to do is we look at essentially an area around our existing RMS wells, and then we can actually select that pixel essentially, and then we can get a sense of what the elevation is, and then we can kind of compare it to the previous year, but also we can compare it to water levels. So if we're seeing huge swings in water levels, are we seeing changes sort of at the land surface? So that's kind of what we're proposing for land subsidence as the sort of measurement tool. If you go to the next slide, Ibrahim. So again, a similar graph as we've seen for water levels. We're looking at the same 6 wells, but in this case, we're looking at land subsidence utilizing the DWR INSAR data as a proxy. So again, similar sort of concept. We've got a couple of locations marked in black squares there that are the sort of change in land subsidence from 2015 to 2019. And then what we've done is there's some obviously some accuracy challenges with this data set. So we've tried to put the accuracy bars on the same graph so that it gives you a sense of what the level of accuracy is. And then we have to, again, required to define MOs and MTs. So we've sort of superimposed the MO and the MT for each one of the locations. So just big picture concept, is this sounding familiar to folks? Does anybody have any questions on sort of the approach? Again, we've kind of covered this a couple of meetings ago, but we want to include it again just so everybody's on the same page. Any questions you're seeing pop up, Christy?
Not see anything yet. I'll stop you if there is.
Okay, and again, this is just sort of a extrapolated from the INSAR data, so folks can actually see, you know, this is looking at essentially vertical displacement on the x-axis, sorry, on the y-axis, and it's looking at it back from 2015 to about 2020. It's pretty obvious to me that we're not seeing any changes. And then if you superimpose how water levels have changed at these specific areas, it kind of aligns with water levels. We're not seeing huge swings in water levels that are sort of, triggering inelastic subsidence. So we're not seeing it, but again, we have to set MOs and MTs for this particular SMC. So what we're proposing for the MT is 0.5 feet of inelastic subsidence over a 5-year period at each one of the RMS wells. And again, we're going to include some language in there that links it to lowering of groundwater elevation. So if there's an earthquake, something happens, you know, we're not on the hook to fix that problem. That's sort of out of our control. All we can control is how much groundwater is extracted out of a specific area. So that's the MT, and then the MO really is at the accuracy of the instrumentation, which turns out to be about 0.20 feet over a 5-year period. I think it's about 0.05 feet of accuracy per year. 0.05, yeah. So anyway, that's kind of what we're proposing for the MO. And then as far as an undesirable result, we need to define what an undesirable result is. We're saying when 3 out of the 6 RMS locations exceed the MT, that would be considered an undesirable result. So similar concepts, but just wanted to kind of sort of get that information out there.
Eddie, you have a
Yes,
quick question.
yes, Brenna, it's the MO, the 0.2 feet is outside the margin of error. The margin of error is 0.05 feet. So yeah, 0.2 is outside the margin of error.
And just to let everybody know, I'm going to go ahead and pop into the chat just the recording of your number for this, but we can certainly still have discussion. I just want it as a demarcation in the chat of where we started talking about subsidence.
Okay. So I think that's the last slide on land subsidence, Christy. I think, Ibrahim, you want to go to the next one? I think that's it.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Okay. Questions, comments, feedback?
Thanks, Scott.
And as everybody starts to put in their numbers here, please know that you will see all of the numbers. They will come as tables as part of the meeting summary for this particular meeting. Bethany, is that a question that you have just as far as clarification?
Yeah, I assume the baseline is from, you know, either 2015 or today's measurement of the current ground elevation. We don't want to go 5 feet lower than that in 5 years. Is that right? I'm sorry, 0.5 feet.
Yeah, 0.5
lower
feet.
than that.
Right.
Yeah.
5
Yeah,
feet.
correct.
Yeah, no 5 feet. Never seen that. So. Some places
Correct,
I've seen 5 feet.
Sarah had a question about why we picked 3 out of 6, not 2 out of 6 for this MT. We could go with 2 out of 6. No,
Yeah. I mean, I don't have a strong preference. This is just, again, something we've done in another sub-basin. But if folks, depending on the poll, we can adjust that.
if you prefer, we can make it 2 out of 6. I guess if everyone prefer.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Eddie, did you say that some basins do 2, some do 3? It's kind of, or is 3 a standard number?
It's a percentage, you know, it's kind of a percentage. So some have done 25%, some have done 50%. It just really depends. I mean, we're in a basin that does not have subsidence. So I think that's why we chose to go with 50%. But if folks have a strong preference, I mean, they want to change it to 25, it doesn't make a difference to me, really.
Or 2 out of 6, just to make it consistent with the other SMCs. I mean, we can go that way too.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. I've recorded everybody's numbers as they put in there. Is there any final comments or anything to be recorded as far as ideas, concepts, input for land subsidence?
The key things here is kind of either 2 out of 6 or 3 out of 6. So, and we'll incorporate that in the next draft. Okay. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Next one's water quality. And so just some clarification that I think popped up when we last presented this. When we're talking about water quality, we need to show, at least from a SIGMA perspective, we're making sure that we're not having a link between how the groundwater management is occurring and how that could be impacting, contamination. So as an example, if we're operating in a basin with a lot of saline water and our operations are actually, causing the saline water to mix with fresh groundwater, that's something we can control. And or if we start to install, say, new agricultural wells or municipal wells close to perhaps an active contaminated site, a gas station that's got, contamination, those are the things we can control through Sigma. So that's why we're sort of, when we're talking about degraded water quality, there has to be a link between groundwater management activities and actually impacting the contamination. So that's a concept I wanted to kind of mention, or we wanted to mention. Something else that we wanted to talk about was and we heard this from folks last time, was, what about naturally occurring constituents? I mentioned the iron, the manganese, the boron, arsenic. That's not managed under Sigma. That's managed under the state. So the state, the State Water Resource Control Board, Department of Public Health, they're managing that. We're not looking to take over their activities. We're not looking at, managing if water can be utilized because of natural occurring constituents. That's not what Sigma is about. We're just looking at, again, that link between how the basin is managed or active pumping occurs and how that might impact the mobilization. So again, we can't really control sort of natural constituents. And then also, we had some conversations about, land use, irrigated lands program, Department of Pesticides, their existing programs. So they're kind of taking care of the urban, the ag, the industrial uses specific to nitrates, pesticides, herbicides. We're not stepping on their toes. They're going to continue to operate. So we're not managing that under Sigma. So just some clarification points there that hopefully help folks kind of make sure that works. Sarah had a question. We should be measuring for some contaminants with cause link then. Yes, exactly. So we're going to utilize TDS. So that's what we're proposing. So if you go to the next slide, Ibrahim. So what we're proposing is, again, we did sort of the baseline, we got some current water quality data back. I think I should have shared the results to you. And again, just kind of getting a more current snapshot, we think that, utilizing TDS as a proxy for the overall sort of water quality of the aquifer seems to be applicable. And so, unfortunately, in some of these wells, we don't have a lot of historical information, but we've got plans to do that. So again, as the GSP is implemented, we're going to be going out yearly and collecting TDS data as well as the water quality data. So what we're kind of proposing initially is for the MO to be at 500 milligrams per liter for TDS. And then the MT, we could set it at 1,000, or we could set it at 750. I don't have a strong preference. I think we propose probably the MT be set at 1,000 or 750. I don't really have a strong preference on that. But again, hopefully it's obvious from some of the recent DWR results specific to TDS, we don't really have sort of what I would consider a water quality issue in any of these wells or the wells that were sampled. So I think if you go to the next slide, Ibrahim.
Yeah,
that might be it, huh? No. So these are, again, we don't have, like water levels, we don't have this great historical record, but we ideally would like to use the same wells that we're measuring water levels with to look at that causation link with water quality. And so we're just kind of sharing with you sort of the historical information on how water quality has changed in those specific wells. So,
so we only have 2 wells, with historical data.
Yeah.
One of them in the East Central. This is have data going, more recent, and again below 200 TDS. So well within the limit for the secondary MCL, and one well in the north that doesn't have data since the 1960s and 70s. Right. So the last measure is 1978, 77. And again, all of the historical measurements were below 500. And this well in the north, we got a data point for it, this 2021 survey And that data point was consistent with the historical record, just around 480 milligram per liter. And so again, below the AMO. And that's kind of what shown here is basically this is the most recent measurements we have for these two wells.
Bethany, I think, has a question, and I also wanted to just point out, Sarah, you had the comment of not understanding the setting the MT below the MCL. Yep. And Bethany, go ahead with your question or comment. And Pat, I'll get right back to you afterwards.
Could you just briefly maybe explain the link between TDS and groundwater management?
Yeah. And when I say groundwater management, I guess probably I should say active pumping. So the thought would be if we use TDS, which is a salt, to use that as a proxy to sort of understand the overall quality of the water. So, you know, if we had high TDS, like 1500 TDS, that there could be some indication that there's other sort of water quality parameters in there that could be elevated. So the idea is if we can, you know, maintain, if we utilize TDS as a proxy and keep that level somewhat stable, that gives us a sort of a relative indication that pumping activities are not inducing any additional salt loading, contamination, changing the water quality parameters drastically. So that's kind of what I'm sort of trying to utilize TDS for.
Yeah, and
Okay,
in the most of the Central Valley, I mean, I know this historic area, I think you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think John and Eddie, but most of this area, I don't know, few millennia back, millions of years ago, was part of the ocean. And so most of the fresh aquifers, beneath the fresh aquifers, there is a salt water layer. And one of the key things we look at is as you pump water, you don't bring, you're trying to avoid bringing that very deep salt water into it. I'm not sure that's the case in Big Valley, but that's a concern, and that's kind of TDS is being used widely to look at that. If you're using some of that because of happens when your extraction exceeds the sustainable yield of the basin, and then you kind of start pulling these deeper contaminants up into the freshwater basin.
And it looks like Pat lowered his hand, but Peter, you have yours up. Peter, do you have a question or comment?
Yes, very quickly. Manganese and iron, we saw some of those levels kind of off the charts on some of those wells, and those are a problem. I mean, I don't know to what it exists. Is there a link between the TDS and manganese and iron? In other words, such that if pumping generated a lot of manganese and iron, that would somehow trigger something adverse?
It could be, because the TDS sort of gives you the overall sort of, you know, general water quality parameter that sort of, I mean, it's on the salt side of things anyway. So it could, yeah.
Well, I guess that's my question. I'm not sure there's a salt constituent in manganese and iron. So
no, it's not. And I think iron and manganese is kind of something different. They're just tied to
it's the rock, really.
It's the rock that's around the area where you pull the water. And so
right.
Yeah. And so
okay. So manganese increase, if you increase pumping and getting manganese because of that, it's a natural constituent. Exactly. I'm very familiar with it because of a drinking water issue. But anyway, so I guess it's not going to, the possibility that we get a big slug of manganese isn't going to trigger the TDS.
Yeah, and we see that in some of the wells the DWR monitored this year. You can see very high manganese, but very low TDS. And so it's not really
okay. That's what I needed to know. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. I think also Peter, on the iron, you know, depending on the casing material, I mean, there's all kinds of triggers. So you don't want to be on, you know, the GSA doesn't want to be on the hook for dealing with an iron issue that's related to somebody's casing failing. You know.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And we have two Pats on, so I'll be very specific and say, Pat Scully, you had your hand up.
Okay. Question on the collecting of these samples for the water quality. Are the wells flushed first before are they run for a period of time? And over the historical observations or the few that you have, do we know that was done consistently?
Yeah, it's good. It's a good point. So I can tell you for the wells that we had DWR sample, we tried to flush at a minimum 10 casing volumes. For what happened historically, we have no idea. Yeah, we have absolutely no idea. So again, you start to factor in sort of the sampling error, the lab error. You know, are these numbers realistic? I think they were sort of elevated, but that was kind of one of the reasons we said, well, look, DWR offered to kind of quickly go out and do some sampling. I said, let's do it. And that gives us sort of a baseline of, you know, not the specific well, but the general area. And as you can see from all of the wells that they sampled, except for one, I mean, the TDS is really good, you know? So I think anything below 500 is pretty good. So, yeah.
And I do want to say, we're just going to do a quick time check. Bethany is keeping us honest here because she has to jump off for another meeting. We still do have a couple of other agenda items and things, but just kind of making a decision of what we want to do with the material we have left.
Yeah, I mean, my thought would be for the degraded water quality, the MT, I've seen some basins set it at 1,000, some set it at 1,500. I'm recommending 750 for the MT, and then the MO would be set at 500. And then as far as, you know, an undesirable result, we did add another well for the water quality piece. So we're saying, you know, when 2 out of 7 wells, RMS wells, exceed that MT for 2 consecutive years, then that would trigger the undesirable result, and I guess cause the undesirable result and trigger a management action. So that's kind of what we're proposing. So I guess, Christy, on that, I guess vote perhaps on this.
Sure, we can pop that up. Megan noted that we do have a meeting coming up in 2 weeks. We seem to be having them every 2 weeks now, which is good. Sarah didn't think she had her question answered about the MT being set below the MCL. If we could address that for her.
MT.
Sarah, did you want to illuminate that a little more? Or?
Oh, she means the secondary MCL for drinking water. Yeah. So the issue here goes the word primary versus secondary. Primary meaning a health impact. Secondary does not mean a health impact. It just it's still reportable, but does not mean you can drink that water. In many areas and systems in California, you can find that the TDS is higher than the MCL. But it's reportable, but it's not enforceable. So it doesn't have any health issue. It just basically your water become hard. Talking about hard water, you can bring softener and stuff like that. And then when you talk about the secondary MCL, 700 and 1,000, then it becomes an obvious issue of odor and taste, where the customers basically start and the users start actively feeling the taste and the odor of the water and might not be acceptable. There is the specific limits different for ag, because it basically above a certain limit for ag, it harms crops and certain types of crops with elevated TDS. But for human use, the secondary MCL does not correspond to specific health issues.
Sarah, do you want me to reach comment, or do you want to chime in with your feelings there?
Yeah, I think it's bad precedent to set an MT below an MCL. Even if it's a secondary MCL, there are MCLs that are being adjusted all the time. And even the secondary MCLs are being adjusted, such as manganese, from what water resource or the water board is telling me. So I don't think we should be setting it below that.
Okay. So you'd like the MT set at 500?
Yeah, I wouldn't go any lower than the MCL.
Okay. Cool. Christy, did we get feedback from everyone?
We did. We have something from everybody.
Okay, perfect. Let's jump ahead then to.
So knowing that we have some folks who have to leave and knowing that we had one more SMC that we were going to cover, I'd just like to ask the tech teams, how would you like to transport that over to the 22nd meeting? Would you like to potentially call a special meeting? How would you like to handle that?
Who's leaving? Can we?
Bethany needs to leave. Was there anybody other than Bethany who needed to leave? Sarah has to leave shortly.
So let's see if we can cover this in like 5 or 10 minutes, at least get the highlights, and then we can follow up with the discussion if we need to. Eddie?
Okay, so for the depletion of interconnected surface waters, we heard loud and clear. And so what we've done is we've adjusted our monitoring network. So you can see along Adobe Creek, we've got gauges that Sarah has sort of, well, not Sarah, but that are being monitored. So what we've tried to do along Adobe Creek is we tried to locate wells that are close to those gauges. So we can tie sort of surface water conditions to groundwater conditions. And then we attempted to do the same thing along Kelsey Creek. Obviously, it's a little difficult because we don't have as many wells, sort of, especially between the sort of the upper gauge and sort of the first monitoring well location. So again, for this discussion, same concepts, but we're just using a different set of data, a different set of wells. So I think with that, Ibrahim, if you go to the next slide. Okay, so here's sort of the concept again. We got depth feet below ground surface, and then we've identified the wells sort of at the surface. You can see the Adobe Creek wells are symbolized in the first 3, and then we've got Kelsey Creek on the second, or the third, the 3 on the right. MOs and MTs. Same concept. We've looked at sort of the highest spring and then the lowest spring values, and then we've sort of adjusted our MOs and MTs accordingly. The other difference is that we have included on these graphs the creek bed elevation, so you get a sense of where the creek bed is in relation to the groundwater elevation. So I'll give folks a minute to kind of digest that. The concepts are very similar. Except for one thing we did look at was we wanted to make sure that on the MT, because the rooting depths of some of these plants is can be greater than 30 feet, we kind of utilize that as a metric as well. So I think with that, I'll give folks just a chance to kind of digest this information. And then maybe we can, I don't know, Ibrahim, you can address questions on this, or we can kind of tag team it. So.
Yeah, so very similar concept. We looked at the low MT. We said basically that the key observation is when we looked at the data provided from DWR and TNC on the condition of the GDEs, especially the habitat around the creeks. We looked back since 1985 all the way to current condition. We looked at different indices. All of them indicated really good health of the basin and stable health of the GDEs. And based on that discussion, we said all of the observed historical data indicates that these plants was able to survive during these observed historical trend of the high and the low. And so we decided to go with the observed high and low. So we picked up the low spring level. We added the margin of operation flexibility, but then we capped it. So we will not lower it too much. We lower it a little bit to operation flexibility margin up to 30 feet. If it exceeded 30 feet, we capped it at 30 feet. And that's happened, for example, here in this location here. It's capped at 30 feet. It could have been gone a little bit lower than 30 feet, but we capped it at 30 feet because of that recommendation from TNC about the rooting depth. Here in this location, the existing spring level is already 40 feet low. And so we did not bring the MT below that level. We capped the MT as the lowest spring. Again, with the idea that all of these habitat have done well across all of the past observed levels. And so that's kind of the 2 caps we added here. So that's for the MTs. For the MOs, we also took a very similar methodology. Again, we looked at the highest spring and then we added a margin of operational flexibility as a 20% of the range, but then we capped it. We said we will not lower it below the bed of a nearby creek. So if these 3 wells is near to the Adobe Creek, at least the MT has to be at the creek level. So again, MT again is a desirable condition, and so we set it at that to maintain hydraulic connectivity with the creeks. And the same thing also happened here for example, in this well here on Kelsey Creek. If we lowered it below the spring level, it will be below the creek level. And we said since it's a spring, at least it needs to be at least to be hydraulically connected to the creek. So that's basically the two how we set up the MOs and MTs.
You want to go to the next slide real quick, Ibrahim? I think there's been some comments pop up about timing. And so I don't know, I guess maybe Christy,
yeah.
Do we want to push this off to the 22nd?
I do. Yeah, I do. I think we should. I think that, given the fact that not everybody's here and we've run such timely meetings before, knowing that this one was bound to just be a little bit longer.
Yeah.
I also want to give, I don't know if I think we may have 1 or 2 members of the public who may be joining us, and I want to give them time for their comment period as well. I see Pat has a question, so we're going to answer his question really quick. Pat Scully.
I would ask that it's pretty confusing to me looking what's presented right here. And I think this really has big ramifications, particularly for agriculture. There's been talk of frost protection in the springtime. I would like as much information on this topic as we can get before the next meeting, including if there's any evidence that suggests frost protection in the springtime influences stream flows. I'd like to have everything that we possibly know or what you're proposing on this to be laid out to where we really have time to sit down and dissect it before the meeting.
Okay. This is Brenna. I just want to second Pat's comment. I think this topic has potential to be kind of one of the more vigorously discussed topics. So given that we're putting it off to a later date, if we can just get some more information, a little longer presentation on it so we can really have all the information as we're discussing it and making these decisions.
Yep, I agree.
Sure. If I can just ask everybody to hang out for just one moment, I do want to bring up one thing, and then we'll go to a public comment period if people have any public comments or anything that they want to share in general. But for the December meeting date that we had moved because of the holiday, it fell on, I believe it was Christmas Eve. We moved it to December 10th, but given the calendar that we're looking at, we need to try to move that back a little bit to be somewhere in the range of December 15th, 16th, or 17th. And I just wanted to publicly acknowledge that. We'll send out a doodle poll to make sure that the GSPAC members, as many as can be, will be present for that. But I just did want to note that publicly for everyone, that we're going to be changing that. And we have to, based on kind of the schedule of where we're at, to give enough public review period for things. So. And with that, we'll move to any public comment that we might have, or any input or lasting thoughts that anybody wanted to share. All right. And seeing none, we'll go ahead and I'll turn this back over to Marina to adjourn. It sounds like the tech team will provide some additional information to folks in advance of our meeting on the 22nd. If we perceive that we might need a little bit longer based on what the agenda looks like for that, we may ask to extend that with everyone for about a half an hour on that date. But otherwise, we'll go forward with the standing meeting. Marina, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you everyone again for participating. I know this meeting was filled with lots of information and lots of great conversation. So be back here on October 22nd. We will try and get the recording of today's discussion on the website by today. Either way, we'll send the GSPAC and the listserv that email confirmation that it is uploaded. We're gonna have staff working it right when we hang up today. So with that being said, thank you guys for joining us, and we will adjourn at 1:44 p.m.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.